The morning sun broke warm and golden over the gladdened fields, painting the river in shades of honey and amber. The water moved slowly here, winding through meadows thick with iris and water lilies, their purple and white blooms nodding gently in the breeze. It was the kind of morning that made you grateful to be alive, the kind that promised good things, simple pleasures, and honest work. Sméagol sat at the edge of his small boat, his bare feet dangling in the cool water, watching the ripples spread outward in perfect circles. He was humming to himself an old tune his grandmother used to sing, something about summer afternoons and berry picking. He was a small fellow, even for a river-folk hobbit, with clever fingers and bright, curious eyes that missed very little. His dark hair fell across his forehead in unruly curls, and he had a habit of pushing it back absently while he thought. "Sméagol, are you dreaming again?" called a voice from further upstream. "The fish won't catch themselves, cousin." Sméagol grinned and looked over to where Déagol was already knee-deep in the water, his fishing line cast out into a promising pool beneath the willows. Déagol was broader in the shoulders than Sméagol, with a round, cheerful face that seemed always on the verge of laughter. They had been friends since they were small children, running through these same meadows, swimming in these same waters, getting into the kind of harmless trouble that young hobbits did. "I'm thinking, not dreaming," Sméagol called back. "There's a difference, you know. Thinking is productive. Thinking about lunch doesn't count as productive," Déagol replied, and there was that laugh in his voice, warm and familiar as an old blanket. Sméagol stood up in the boat, balancing easily, and began to pole toward his cousin. The boat glided smoothly through the water, barely disturbing the surface. These were the boats they had grown up with, shallow-yawned and perfect for the gentle rivers of their homeland. Every river-folk child learned to handle one before they could properly read. "I was thinking," Sméagol said, as he drew closer, "about that old story grandmother used to tell, the one about the kings of men and their great battles and all that treasure lost in these very waters." Déagol rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "You and your stories. This is the Gladden Fields, cousin, not some treasure vault. The only things down there are fish, mud, and probably some very old boots." "But it could be true," Sméagol insisted, lowering his own line into the water. "Grandmother said her grandmother saw strange things in the river once. Lights beneath the water like fallen stars. Probably just fishing lures catching the moonlight," Déagol said, but he said it kindly. He knew how Sméagol loved his tales and histories, how he would sit for hours listening to the old ones speak of days long past. "Now come on, let's catch something worth eating. My stomach thinks my throat's been cut." They fished in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only comes between people who have known each other all their lives. The sun climbed higher, warming their shoulders. Dragonflies skimmed the water surface, their wings catching the light like tiny shards of colored glass. From somewhere in the meadow came the call of a meadowlark, sweet and clear. Sméagol felt a tug on his line and began to pull it in carefully. A nice trout, fat and silvery, came flopping into the boat. He unhooked it with practiced ease and dropped it into the basket at his feet. "That's 3 for me, 2 for you," he announced cheerfully. "The day's not over yet," Déagol countered. "I've got a feeling about this spot. Something good is down there. I can feel it in my bones. That's probably just age catching up with you, old fellow," Sméagol teased. They were the same age, both seeing their 33rd year, but it was a running joke between them. Déagol stuck out his tongue, then turned his attention back to his line. His face took on that concentrated look he got when he was really focused on something. Sméagol watched him fondly. They'd been planning to build boats together, to set up a fishing business, to spend their lives doing exactly this, working side by side on the river. It was a good plan, a simple plan, and Sméagol was content with it. Suddenly, Déagol's line went taut. Not the gentle tug of a fish, but a sharp, strong pull that nearly yanked the rod from his hands. "Help, Sméagol. I've got something big, really big." Sméagol shipped his own line quickly and pulled his boat closer. Déagol was bracing himself, his face red with effort, as whatever was on the end of his line pulled and fought with surprising strength. "Is it a pike?" Sméagol asked excitedly. A big pike would feed half the village. "Too strong for a pike," Déagol grunted. It's not swimming like a fish at all. It's stuck on something. I think I've hooked some old debris." Together they worked the line, pulling steadily, carefully, not wanting to break it. Whatever was down there was heavy and stubborn. The water churned and muddied as they hauled their catch toward the surface. "Almost there," Déagol breathed. "Just a bit more." With a final heave, something broke free from the river bottom and came up through the water. But it wasn't a fish, and it wasn't an old boot. Tangled in Déagol's line, covered in river mud and slime, was something that gleamed gold even through the muck. Both hobbits froze, staring. Déagol reached down into the water and pulled the object free. He held it up, and as the river water sluiced off, they could see it clearly. A ring, a simple golden ring, catching the sunlight and throwing it back in warm honey-colored gleams. But there was something about it, something that made you want to look at it, to keep looking at it, to never look away. "It's beautiful," Déagol whispered, his voice strange, distant. Sméagol felt something stir in his chest, something he had never felt before. A wanting, a needing, sharp and fierce as hunger, strong as thirst. The ring seemed to glow in Déagol's hands, seemed to pulse with its own light. "Let me see it," Sméagol said, and his own voice sounded odd to his ears. "I found it," Déagol said, not taking his eyes off the ring. "It's mine, my birthday present to myself." His birthday was indeed that very day. He had turned 33 at dawn. "But I should look at it," Sméagol insisted, reaching out. "Just a look, cousin. We share everything, don't we?" "Not this," Déagol said, and there was something in his voice, something possessive and strange that Sméagol had never heard before. "This is mine alone." The wanting in Sméagol's chest grew stronger, became a clawing need. He had to have it. He had to hold it. It should be his. It was meant to be his. The ring was calling to him, singing to him in a voice only he could hear. "Give it to me," Sméagol heard himself say, but it didn't sound like his voice anymore. It sounded darker, harder. "Give me the ring, Déagol." "No." Déagol clutched the ring to his chest. "It's mine. I caught it fair and square." Something snapped inside Sméagol, something that had always held him back, kept him gentle, kept him kind. The world narrowed down to a single bright point, the golden ring in Déagol's hands. Nothing else mattered. Not friendship, not love, not all the years of laughter and shared secrets. Only the ring, only the precious, precious thing that should be his. He lunged forward, hands reaching, grasping. Déagol stumbled backward in surprise, his feet slipping on the muddy bank. They fell together into the shallow water, struggling, grappling. Déagol was stronger, but Sméagol had surprise on his side, and something else, something fierce and desperate that gave him a strength he had never known. His hands found Déagol's throat. He squeezed. Déagol's eyes went wide with shock and fear. He thrashed, tried to speak, tried to breathe. The ring fell from his grasp into the shallow water between them. Sméagol held on. He held on until Déagol stopped struggling, until his cousin's eyes went glassy and empty, until the water round them ran still. Only then did he release his grip, his hands shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. What had he done? What had he done? But then he saw the ring, lying in the sandy shallows, gleaming up at him like a golden eye. He reached for it with trembling fingers, and the moment his skin touched the metal, a wave of warmth flooded through him. Pleasure, fierce and overwhelming, drowned out the horror of what he had just done. The ring slipped easily onto his finger, fitting perfectly, as though it had been made for him and him alone. His precious, his treasure, his own. Sméagol stood in the shallow water, looking down at Déagol's body, at his cousin's face, peaceful now, eyes closed, hair floating gently in the current. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice screamed in anguish, but it was distant, muffled, easily ignored. The ring pulsed warm on his finger, and with each pulse that voice grew fainter. He dragged Déagol's body to the deeper water and let the current take it, watched it drift away downstream, toward the great river, toward the sea. Then he stood alone in the gladdened fields, the morning sun still shining bright and golden, the meadowlarks still singing, the world still turning as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Sméagol looked at the ring on his finger, turned his hand to watch it catch the light. No one would understand. No one would see how precious it was, how it belonged to him and him alone. They would try to take it. They would call him thief, murderer. They wouldn't understand that the ring had chosen him, that it was meant to be his. He had to leave, had to go somewhere safe, somewhere he could keep his treasure, protect it, cherish it forever. But first, he went home. He had to try. He had to see if somehow, impossibly, everything could go back to the way it was. He walked into his village in the late afternoon, the ring hidden in his pocket, burning against his skin like a coal. The river folk hobbits looked up from their work as he passed, called out greetings that he barely heard. His grandmother was in her garden tending her herbs. "Sméagol, dear boy," she called. "Where's Déagol? Wasn't he with you today?" "Gone," Sméagol said, his voice flat. "The river took him." The lies came easily, flowed from his tongue like water. "An accident," he said. Déagol had slipped, hit his head, sunk before Sméagol could reach him. He had searched and searched, but found nothing. The river was deep there, the current strong. They believed him at first. Why wouldn't they? Sméagol had never been known to lie, had always been honest and true. But there were questions. Why had Sméagol come back alone? Why hadn't he raised the alarm immediately? Why did he keep touching his pocket, as though checking for something precious? And then Déagol's body washed up 3 days later, and there were bruises on his throat, finger-shaped bruises that told their own dark story. The river folk gathered. They looked at Sméagol with new eyes, suspicious eyes, frightened eyes. They asked him questions he couldn't answer, or answered badly, stumbling over his words, contradicting himself. The ring burned in his pocket, and all he could think about was keeping it safe, keeping it hidden. "What did you do, Sméagol?" his grandmother asked, and there were tears on her weathered face. "What did you do to Déagol?" "Nothing," he said, backing away. "Nothing, I didn't, it wasn't." But they advanced on him. The people who had known him all his life, who had loved him, taught him, raised him. They advanced with hard faces and harder words. Murderer, they called him. Thief. Monster. "Get out," his grandmother said, and her voice broke on the words. "Get out and never come back. You're no grandson of mine." Sméagol ran. He ran from their accusing eyes, their pointing fingers, their righteous anger. He ran from the only home he had ever known, clutching the ring in his pocket, feeling it pulse against his palm like a second heartbeat. He ran north, toward the mountains, toward the wild lands where no one would follow, where no one would try to take his precious. He ran until his legs gave out, until he collapsed in a hollow between the roots of an ancient oak tree. There, in the darkness, he pulled out the ring and looked at it. It gleamed up at him, beautiful and terrible, and when he slipped it onto his finger, the world changed. Colors became sharper, sounds clearer. He could hear the heartbeat of a mouse in the undergrowth, see the path of ants crossing the forest floor. He felt powerful, alive in a way he had never felt before, and he felt invisible. When he wore the ring, the world seemed to fade around him, as though he had stepped sideways out of reality. He could move unseen, unheard, like a ghost, like a shadow. Perfect. His precious made him perfect. With it, he would never be caught, never be punished, never have to give it up. He could keep it forever. Just him and his precious, alone together. Sméagol curled up in the hollow of the tree, the ring warm on his finger, and smiled. Let them search. Let them hunt. They would never find him. He was beyond them now, beyond their rules and their judgments. He was free. The night came down soft and dark around him, and somewhere in that darkness, in the space between what he had been and what he would become, Sméagol began to change. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, just a hardening around his eyes, a thinning of his lips, a coldness in his heart where warmth had been. But it was only the beginning. The ring had found its new master, and it would not let him go, not in 100 years, not in 500. It would hold him, shape him, remake him into something new, something that served its purposes. The river continued to flow through the gladden fields, indifferent to tragedy. The meadowlarks continued to sing. The sun continued to rise and set, and in a hollow between the roots of an oak tree, clutching a golden ring, Sméagol dreamed dark dreams, and did not know that he would never wake from them. His precious had claimed him, and he would never be free again. The weeks that followed were a blur of running, hiding, and creeping through the wild lands. Sméagol moved north and east, always keeping to the shadows, always listening for pursuit that never came. The river folk had let him go, it seemed. Perhaps they were too frightened of what he had become, or perhaps they simply wanted to forget he had ever existed. Either way, he was alone now, truly alone, with only the ring for company. And what company it was! The ring whispered to him in the quiet moments, though not with words exactly. It was more like feelings, impressions that bloomed in his mind like dark flowers. It told him he was special, chosen, deserving of its power. It told him the world was cruel and full of thieves who would try to steal his precious if they knew he had it. It told him to trust no one, to keep to the shadows, to protect what was his. Sméagol listened. What else could he do? The ring was all he had left. He traveled through forests thick with ancient oaks and through meadows where the grass grew tall enough to hide him. He avoided villages and farms, staying well away from the paths of men and hobbits. When his stomach cramped with hunger, he caught fish in streams with his bare hands, the way his father had taught him long ago. The ring made him quick, made his fingers nimble and sure. He could pluck a trout from the water faster than a kingfisher could dive. But fish alone weren't enough. He grew thin, his clothes hanging loose on his shrinking frame. His skin, once healthy and brown from days on the river, began to pale from lack of sunlight. He moved mostly at night now, finding that the darkness suited him, that his eyes adjusted to it in ways that seemed impossible. Another gift from the ring, perhaps, though he didn't question it too closely. The mountains loomed ahead, the misty mountains, their peaks white with snow even in summer. They rose like a wall from the earth, forbidding and ancient, and something about them called to Sméagol. Here, the ring seemed to whisper, here is safety, here is home. Deep in the bones of the world, where no one will find you, where your precious will be safe forever. He began to climb. The lower slopes were forested thick with pine and fir, their needles soft beneath his feet. But as he climbed higher, the trees thinned and disappeared, replaced by bare rock and scree that shifted treacherously underfoot. The air grew cold, thin, hard to breathe. His hands became raw from gripping sharp stone. His feet blistered and bleeding through his worn shoes, but he kept climbing. The ring urged him on, filled him with a strength that his body alone could not have mustered. Up and up, into the high places where the wind howled like a living thing, and the clouds pressed down like wet wool. He found the cave entrance on a grey morning when the world was lost in mist. It was nothing much to look at, just a dark slash in the mountainside, barely wide enough for a hobbit to squeeze through. But when Sméagol peered inside, when he felt the cool breath of air flowing from the depths, something in his chest eased. Yes, this was right. This was home. He crawled inside, his precious clutch tight in one hand, and let the darkness swallow him whole. The passage was tight at first, forcing him to wriggle on his belly like a worm. Dirt and small stones showered down around him, getting into his hair, his mouth, his eyes. But he pressed on, driven by an instinct he didn't fully understand. The ring wanted him to go deeper, and what the ring wanted, he wanted too. They were becoming one, he and his precious, two parts of a single whole. The passage widened after a while, opened into a natural tunnel that sloped steadily downward into the mountain's heart. Sméagol walked carefully, one hand trailing along the wall for balance, his eyes adjusting to the absolute darkness. And they did adjust, remarkably so. Within an hour, he could make out the shapes of rocks, the texture of the walls, the subtle variations in the blackness around him. He walked for what felt like hours, maybe days. Time became strange in the darkness, elastic and uncertain. He had no sun to mark the passing of hours, no stars to guide him. Only the gentle downward slope of the tunnel and the ring's patient whisper urging him on. Finally, the tunnel opened into a cavern, and Sméagol stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He could hear water, the gentle lap and slosh of it against stone. A lake underground, hidden in the mountain's deepest places. The sound of it was soothing, familiar, a reminder of the rivers of his youth. He made his way carefully to the water's edge and knelt, dipping his hands into the cold, clear water. It tasted of stone and minerals, ancient and pure. He drank deeply, feeling strength return to his limbs. Then he sat back and looked around, trying to take in the dimensions of his new home. The cavern was vast, he could tell that much even in the darkness. The ceiling rose high overhead, lost in shadow. The lake stretched away in all directions, though he couldn't tell how far. The walls were rough stone, water-carved and ancient, and here and there he could see the glimmer of moisture where underground streams trickled down to feed the lake. It was perfect, hidden, safe, secret. No one would ever find him here. He could live here forever with his precious, just the two of them, safe from the cruel world above. Sméagol found a shelf of rock near the water's edge and made it his own. He gathered what few possessions he had, his tattered cloak, his worn shoes, and arranged them carefully. Then he sat cross-legged on the stone and pulled out the ring, holding it up to catch what little light filtered down from somewhere far above. "My precious," he whispered, and the word felt right in his mouth, felt true. My own, we're safe now. No one will find us. No one will take you from me." The ring gleamed softly in the darkness, and Sméagol slipped it onto his finger. Immediately, the world sharpened. He could see the cavern now with perfect clarity, could make out every ripple on the lake's surface, every crack in the stone walls. He could hear things too, sounds that should have been impossible to hear. The drip of water from stalactites high overhead, the scrape of small claws on stone somewhere in the darkness, the whisper of air moving through hidden passages. He took the ring off again, watched the world dim back to near blackness. Then he put it on once more, marveling at the transformation. This was power, true power. With the ring he was more than he had ever been. Without it, he was nothing. The days blurred together after that. Sméagol learned the rhythms of his new home, learned where the fish were thickest in the lake, learned which passages led deeper into the mountains, and which were dead ends. He caught blind fish with his hands, pale things that had never seen the sun, and ate them raw because he had no way to make fire, and had lost the desire for cooked food anyway. The raw flesh was sweet and cold, and it filled his belly well enough. He found other creatures in the darkness too, pale grubs that lived in the damp soil near the lake, beetles with shells like polished black stones, even small bats that roosted in the high places and squeaked irritably when he disturbed them. All of it was food. All of it kept him alive, kept him strong enough to guard his precious. Sometimes he wore the ring for days at a time, reveling in the clarity it brought, the sense of power and possibility. But he learned quickly that this had consequences. When he wore it too long, his head began to ache. His thoughts became confused and scattered. Worse, he began to hear things that weren't there. Voices in the darkness, footsteps echoing in empty passages, the sound of laughter that made him whirl around searching for intruders who didn't exist. So he learned moderation, learned to ration his use of the precious. A few hours each day, no more. Just enough to hunt effectively, to explore his territory, to feel that rush of power that made everything worthwhile. The seasons turned far above, though Sméagol had no way of knowing it. Spring became summer, summer became autumn, autumn became winter, and still he remained in his cavern, content with his solitude, his fish, and his precious. The world above might as well have ceased to exist. It didn't matter any more. Nothing mattered except the ring. His body began to change as the months slipped by. His skin, already pale from lack of sunlight, became translucent, almost luminous in the darkness. His eyes, once bright and curious, grew large and protuberant, better suited for seeing in the pitch black of his cavern. His hair, which he had once kept neatly trimmed, grew long and lank, hanging in greasy strands around his face. His hands changed most of all. The fingers grew longer, the nails hard and thick, perfect for catching slippery fish and cracking the shells of beetles. His feet, no longer confined by shoes which had long since rotted away, became tough and calloused, able to grip the wet stones without slipping. He didn't notice these changes, or if he did, he didn't care. What did it matter what he looked like? There was no one to see him, no one to judge. Only him and his precious, alone in the dark. But the most profound changes were happening inside, in his mind and heart. The Sméagol who had laughed with his cousin, who had loved his grandmother, who had dreamed of building boats and living a simple life, was fading like morning mist. In his place, something new was emerging, something harder, colder, more cunning. He began to talk to himself in the long hours of darkness, having no one else to speak with. At first it was just muttering, half-formed thoughts spoken aloud to break the silence. But gradually it became more organized, more purposeful. He would ask himself questions and answer them, hold entire conversations with himself about where to hunt, what to eat, how best to guard his precious. And sometimes, in those conversations, he referred to himself differently, not as I, but as we. We needs to catch fish, he would say. We must protect our precious. We hates the nasty bright light, don't we, precious? It was as though he was splitting in two, becoming both the speaker and the listener, the master and the servant. The ring encouraged this division, fed on it, used it to bind him ever tighter to itself. Years passed. 5 years, 10, 20. Sméagol, or what had been Sméagol, lost count. Time meant nothing in the eternal darkness of his cavern. There was only the endless cycle of hunting, eating, sleeping, and guarding his precious. Nothing else mattered. Nothing else existed. He forgot the sun. He forgot the feel of wind on his face, the smell of flowers, the sound of voices raised in laughter. He forgot his grandmother's garden, the taste of her berry pies, the warmth of her hugs. He forgot Déagol's smile, the way they used to race their boats down the river, the dreams they had shared of the future. All of it faded, became less real than the stone walls of his cavern, less important than the cool weight of the ring on his finger. The past was a dream, insubstantial and meaningless. Only the present mattered, the eternal now of his underground existence. But sometimes, on rare occasions, something would trigger a memory. The taste of a particularly good fish might remind him of meals shared with his family. The sound of water lapping against stone might echo the rivers of his youth. And for just a moment, he would remember what he had been, who he had been. In those moments, a terrible anguish would grip him. What had he done? What had he become? He had murdered his best friend for a piece of gold, had thrown away love and light and everything good in the world for the sake of possessing a ring. The weight of it was crushing, unbearable. But then he would touch the ring, would feel its power flowing into him, and the anguish would fade. The ring was worth it. His precious was worth any price. He had made the right choice, the only choice. And the part of him that was still Sméagol, the small voice that cried out in horror at what he had become, grew quieter and quieter until it was barely a whisper in the depths of his mind. He needed a new name, he decided one day. Sméagol was dead, had died the day he killed Déagol. He was something else now, something new. He sat by the lake, thinking, and made a sound in his throat, a wet, gulping sound that came from deep in his chest. Gollum. Yes, that was what the sound was like. Gollum, Gollum. It suited him, this new name. It was harsh and ugly, like the thing he had become. He tried it out, whispered it to himself in the darkness. Gollum. We are Gollum now, precious. Not Sméagol anymore. Never Sméagol again. Just Gollum and our precious forever and ever. The name stuck. Gollum he was, and Gollum he would remain. The last threads connecting him to his old life frayed and broke, and he was finally, completely, the creature the ring had made him. He established routines, patterns that gave structure to his timeless existence. He would wake, though he couldn't say if it was morning or evening or midnight in the world above, and check first thing that his precious was safe, hidden in the small nook he had carved out of the rock beside his sleeping place. Then he would make his way to the lake to hunt, moving through the darkness with the confidence of long practice. His hunting technique had become refined over the years. He would wade into the shallows, moving slowly, making no sound, his large eyes fixed on the water. When he spotted a fish, he would freeze, waiting until it came within reach. Then his hand would dart out faster than thought, and the fish would be his, flopping and struggling in his grip. He ate some of his catch raw, tearing into the pale flesh with teeth that had become sharp and pointed. But some he would save, hiding them in cool, damp places where they would keep for a few days. He had learned the hard way that fish left too long in the warm upper passages would spoil, filling the air with a stench even he found unpleasant. After eating, he would explore. The mountain was honeycombed with passages, and he had made it his mission to learn them all, to map every tunnel and cavern in his mind. Some passages led to other lakes, smaller than his own, but still rich with blind fish. Some led to chambers filled with fantastic rock formations, stone icicles hanging from the ceiling, stone pillars rising from the floor, all shaped by the patient work of dripping water over countless ages. And some passages led upward, toward the world above. These he avoided mostly, though sometimes curiosity would drive him to climb toward the surface, to peer out at the bright, terrible world he had left behind. But the sunlight hurt his eyes now, made them water and burn, and the open sky made him feel exposed, vulnerable. He never stayed long, always retreating quickly back to the safety of his darkness. He encountered other creatures occasionally. Goblins lived in the mountains, he discovered, nasty, brutish things that moved through the tunnels in groups, carrying crude torches and cruder weapons. Gollum learned to hear them coming from far away, learned to hide in narrow crevices or behind rock formations until they passed. They never saw him, never suspected he was there. The ring made him invisible when he wore it, made him nothing more than a shadow, a whisper of movement in the corner of the eye. Once, he watched a group of goblins drag a prisoner through a tunnel near his territory. A dwarf, short and stocky, with a magnificent beard and eyes full of fury and defiance. The goblins were taking him deeper into the mountain, toward their capital, their great goblin town in the heart of the range. Gollum watched from the darkness, hidden and silent, and felt a strange kinship with the prisoner. Another being stolen from the light, dragged down into the dark places against his will. But the moment passed. The goblins and their prisoner moved on, and Gollum returned to his lake, to his fish, to his precious. Their fates were not his concern. He had no room in his heart for compassion, no space for anything except the ring. The years continued to roll by, turning into decades, and decades into centuries. Gollum endured, sustained by the ring's power, aging so slowly that it was barely noticeable. His body became grotesquely thin, all sinew and bone, but it was strong in its own way, wiry and resilient. He could go weeks without food if necessary, could survive injuries that would have killed a normal hobbit. He was no longer a hobbit, really. He was something else, something unique, shaped by the ring into a creature of shadow and secrets. The last living link to a murder committed long ago, in the sunshine of the Gladden fields, preserved in darkness like an insect trapped in amber. And through it all, through the centuries of solitude and madness, one thing remained constant. The ring, his precious, the only thing in all the world that mattered, the only thing that would ever matter. He would protect it forever, guard it with his life, keep it safe from the thieves and tricksters who would surely come to steal it if they knew it existed. It was his purpose, his reason for being, the core around which his entire existence revolved. In the deep places of the world, in the darkness beneath the mountains, Gollum crouched by his underground lake and whispered to his precious, and the precious whispered back, and neither of them knew or cared that the world above had moved on without them, that everything they had once known had crumbled to dust while they remained, locked together in their lightless prison. Counting out the endless years, time became something strange and fluid in the deep places beneath the mountain. Without the sun to mark the days, without seasons to measure the years, Gollum existed in an eternal present that stretched backward and forward into darkness. He might have been there for 10 years or 100. He no longer knew, no longer cared. The lake became the center of his world, his everything. It was provider and companion, enemy and friend, the source of all life in this sunless realm. He came to know every inch of its shore, every underwater shelf and drop-off, every current and eddy. He could navigate it blindfolded, though in truth he was always blindfolded down here, moving through a darkness so complete that sight and blindness became the same thing. But his eyes had changed. They were huge now, bulging slightly from his skull, able to catch the faintest traces of light. And there was light even here, though no sun had ever touched these waters. Phosphorescent mosses grew in patches on the cavern walls, glowing with a faint green-blue luminescence. Tiny creatures in the water, smaller than the smallest fish, sparkled like underwater stars when disturbed, and sometimes Very rarely a shaft of pale light would filter down from somewhere impossibly far above, a reminder that there was still a world up there, though Gollum tried not to think about it. His fishing techniques had become refined over the long years. He no longer simply grabbed at fish in the shallows. Now he was a hunter, a predator perfectly adapted to his environment. He would wade into the water, moving so slowly that he created no ripples, no disturbance at all. Then he would stand, absolutely still, his hands held just beneath the surface, waiting. The blind fish had no fear because they had never known danger. They would swim past him, sometimes brushing against his legs, and when one came close enough, his hands would strike faster than thought, snatching the fish from the water in one smooth motion. He rarely missed now. His body had become a tool honed for this single purpose. He ate everything, the flesh white and tender, the bones crunchy and satisfying, the eyes which popped between his teeth, the guts bitter but nourishing. Nothing was wasted. In this place where food was precious, where every calorie mattered, he had learned to be efficient. But fish were not his only prey. Sometimes he caught the beetles, the great black armored things that scuttled along the shore. They didn't taste as good as fish, all shell and little meat, but they filled the belly when the fish weren't biting. He learned to flip them over and crack their softer undersides, scooping out the pale flesh within. And once, memorably, he had caught a bat. It had flown too low over the water, and he had leapt, snatching it from the air with reflexes he hadn't known he possessed. The bat had been tough and stringy, full of tiny bones, but it had tasted different from anything else, and he had savored every bite. The ring never left him now. He wore it on a cord around his neck when he fished, unable to bear having it on his finger in the water, terrified that it might slip off and sink to the lake's bottom where he could never retrieve it. But even hanging against his chest, he could feel it, a constant warmth, a steady pulse that matched his heartbeat. At night, or what he thought of as night, though the darkness never changed, he would return to his cave and slip the ring onto his finger. Then he would sit, feeling its power flow through him, and plan. Not plans for escape or return. No, those thoughts were long gone. He planned for protection, for keeping his precious safe. He built traps in the passages leading to his lake. Simple things at first, piles of loose rocks balanced precariously, ready to fall at the slightest disturbance. Then more complex arrangements, tripwires made from spider silk. He had found the spiders in one of the deeper caverns, huge pale things that wove webs strong as rope. He would collect their silk carefully, respectfully, and string it across the passages at ankle height. Anyone walking through in the dark would catch their foot and know he was there. He also created false trails, passages that seemed to lead somewhere but actually circled back on themselves or ended in sheer drops. He marked the true paths with signs only he could read. A stone turned just so, a scratch on the wall, a particular smell. His home became a maze, a fortress, a puzzle that only he could solve. And at its heart, safe in his small cave, slept Gollum and his precious. The orc encounters became more frequent over the years. They were delving deeper into the mountain, expanding their tunnels, searching for something. Gollum didn't know what, didn't care. He only knew they were a threat, and he dealt with them accordingly. When he wore the ring, he was invisible, a ghost, a shadow. He would follow the orc patrols, learning their routes, their habits, their weaknesses. They were stupid creatures, loud and careless, and they never suspected he was there, breathing quietly in the darkness just inches away. Sometimes, when he was feeling bold or particularly hungry, he would steal from them. They would leave packs unguarded while they explored a new passage, and Gollum would slip in, invisible and silent, and take whatever looked interesting. Dried meat, hard bread, once even a skin of some foul-tasting but wonderfully potent liquor that had made his head spin for hours. The orcs would return to find their supplies diminished, and would blame each other, fighting and arguing. Gollum would watch from the shadows, making that Gollum sound deep in his throat, amused by their stupidity. But he was always careful. The ring made him invisible, not invulnerable. If they heard him, if they caught even a hint of his presence, they could still hurt him. So he moved like water, like air, never staying in one place, never leaving a trace. One time, he got careless. He was stealing food from an orc camp, 3 of them sleeping around a dying fire, and he stepped on a loose stone. The sound, just a tiny click of rock on rock, was enough. One of the orcs woke instantly, looking around with suspicious eyes. Gollum froze, the ring on his finger, holding his breath. The orc stood up, drawing a crude knife, and walked straight toward where Gollum stood. For a terrible moment, Gollum thought the creature could somehow see through the ring's magic. But no, the orc was just investigating the sound, checking the area. The orc passed so close that Gollum could smell his breath, rotten meat and fungus spear. Could have reached out and touched him. But Gollum stayed absolutely still, every muscle locked. And after a moment the orc grunted and went back to sleep. Gollum didn't move for another hour. When he finally crept away, his heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He returned to his lake and didn't leave his cave for days, clutching his precious and rocking back and forth, whispering to himself, "Stupid, stupid, careless. Could have lost it. Could have lost our precious. Must be more careful. Yes, yes, more careful." But despite the close calls, despite the danger, he couldn't stop himself from venturing out. The orcs fascinated him in a horrible way. They were company of a sort, even if they didn't know he existed. Their voices, harsh and ugly as they were, broke the endless silence. Their fires brought light to the darkness, and sometimes Gollum would creep close just to feel the warmth, to remember what warmth was like. He learned their language over time, picking up words and phrases. It was a crude tongue, full of snarls and grunts, but it had its own logic. He would practice it in his cave, speaking to his precious in Orcish, then in the common tongue he half remembered from his old life, then in his own private language, the one that was neither Sméagol nor Gollum, but something in between. We hates them, precious, yes we does. Nasty orcs, always digging, always searching, but we is cleverer, oh yes. We has our precious and they has nothing, nothing. The years flowed past like the water in his lake, endless and unchanging. Gollum's body continued to transform. His spine curved, forcing him to walk hunched over. His limbs grew long and spidery. His skin became so pale it was almost translucent, blue veins visible beneath like rivers on a map. His hair fell out in patches, leaving him nearly bald. But his mind, fractured as it was, remained sharp. He remembered everything about his lake, his caves, his territory. He could recall the exact location of every trap, every hidden passage, every safe place to hide. His memory for his underground realm was perfect. It was only the surface world that faded. The memories of sun and grass, of family and friendship, grew dimmer with each passing year. They became like dreams, unreal and distant. Sometimes he wasn't sure if they had ever happened at all, or if he had always been here, always been Gollum living alone in the dark. But then he would remember Déagol. That memory never faded. It stayed bright and sharp and painful, a thorn lodged deep in his heart. He could still see his cousin's face, could still feel the weight of what he had done, and in those moments he hated himself, hated what he had become, hated the ring even as he clutched it tighter. "We didn't mean it, precious," he would whisper. "It was an accident. We didn't mean to hurt him. We just wanted, we needed, we had to have it." But even as he spoke, he knew it was a lie. He had meant it. In that moment by the river, he had wanted the ring more than he had wanted anything in his life, more than friendship, more than love, more than his own soul. And he had taken it, and the taking had hollowed him out, left him empty of everything but want. The ring whispered to him constantly now, not in words exactly, but in feelings, in urges, in the subtle shifting of his thoughts. It told him he was special, chosen. It promised him power, long life, safety. It assured him that he was right to hide, right to hoard, right to protect his precious at any cost. And Gollum believed it. Or the part of him that was Gollum believed it, the part that was still Sméagol, buried deep, smothered, but not quite dead. That part knew better. That part wept. He developed rituals to pass the time, to give structure to the structureless days. Every morning he would swim across the lake and back, moving through the water with an eerie grace. The cold water woke him, cleared his head, reminded him that he was still alive, still real. Then he would fish, slowly and patiently, until he had caught enough to fill his belly. He never took more than he needed. Some instinct, perhaps a remnant of his hobbit upbringing, made him careful not to overhunt. The lake was finite, its resources limited. If he took too much, there would be nothing left and he would starve. After eating, he would patrol his territory, checking his traps, looking for signs of intrusion. This could take hours, following the winding passages, moving through chambers large and small. He had names for all of them, names in his own private language. The Hall of Whispers, where the wind made strange sounds. The Crystal Chamber, where formations of stone sparkled in his sight. The Dropping Place, where water fell from high above in a constant thin stream. In the afternoon, if there was such a thing as afternoon, he would rest. Sometimes he slept, curled in his cave with his precious held close. Sometimes he just sat, staring into the darkness, thinking his circular thoughts, and sometimes, rarely, he would sing. The songs were fragments, pieces of melodies he half remembered from his old life. Drinking songs from village taverns, work songs that fishermen sang while mending nets, lullabies his grandmother had crooned when he was small and afraid of the dark. How strange that he had once feared darkness. Now it was his only comfort. He would sing in a voice that was cracked and thin, barely recognizable as song at all, and then he would stop, suddenly aware of how pathetic it sounded, how the cavern seemed to mock him with its silence. No one was listening, no one cared. He was alone, utterly and completely alone, and would be forever. "Doesn't matter," he would mutter. "We don't needs anyone. We has our precious. That's all we needs." But sometimes, in the deepest parts of his sleep, he would dream, not of the ring, not of the lake, but of the gladdened fields in summer, of sitting in a boat with Déagol, the sun warm on his shoulders, the river flowing gently beneath them, of laughing at some joke he couldn't quite remember, of being happy. He would wake from these dreams with tears on his face, or what might have been tears. He wasn't sure his body could still make them. And he would clutch the ring so tightly it left marks on his palm, as if trying to squeeze out the pain, the loss, the terrible grinding weight of the years. "Forget," he would whisper. "Must forget. Past is dead. Only precious matters now. Only precious." And slowly, day by day, year by year, he did forget. The dreams came less often, the memories faded. Sméagol, who had loved the sun and the river, who had laughed with his cousin, who had been part of a family and a community, the person slipped away like water through his fingers. What remained was Gollum, creature of the dark, guardian of the deep places, slave to a golden ring. And that, he told himself, was enough. It had to be enough, because there was nothing else, nothing at all. He sat on his rocky beach, his toes trailing in the cold water, and looked out across the lake. Somewhere in the darkness a fish jumped, creating ripples that spread and spread until they lapped against the shore at his feet. "We is free," he whispered. "No one tells us what to do. No one judges us. No one tries to take our precious. We is free." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. He was not free. He had never been less free. The ring owned him, body and soul. It had taken his past, his future, everything he was and everything he might have been. It had taken his name, his face, his very humanity, and in return, it had given him this: an underground lake, a diet of raw fish, centuries of solitude, the slow transformation from hobbit to something else, something less, something broken. But he could not let it go, even if he wanted to, and he wasn't sure he did not really. He could not let it go. It was part of him now, woven into his flesh, tangled around his heart. Removing it would be like removing his own soul. So he sat in the darkness, as he had sat for countless days and would sit for countless more, and waited. For what? He didn't know. Nothing ever changed in the deep places. Nothing ever would. And that, in a strange way, was comforting. The world above might turn and change, kingdoms might rise and fall, ages might pass. But down here, in the roots of the mountain, by the cold, dark water, everything stayed the same. Gollum, the lake, the precious, forever. The centuries passed like water drops falling into the lake, one after another, each identical to the last, until they accumulated into something vast and incomprehensible. 100 years, 203. Time became meaningless when you had too much of it, when each day was the same as the day before and the day that would come after. Gollum didn't count the years. He had no way to count them, no calendar or marker. He only knew that he had been young when he came to the mountain, and now, whatever now was, he was ancient. His body should have withered and died long ago, but the ring sustained him, kept him alive in a state that was neither living nor dead, but something in between. He had become part of the mountain, as much a feature of the deep places as the stone itself. The orcs who passed through his territory spoke of him in whispers, when they spoke of him at all. A ghost, they said, a shadow that stole food and vanished without trace. Some claimed to have seen glowing eyes in the darkness. Others said they had heard a strange gulping sound echoing through the passages, but no one had ever caught him, and over time he became something of a legend among them. The thing in the dark, best left alone. The Goblin town had grown over the years. What had started as a few exploratory tunnels had become a vast warren of passages and chambers. Carved into the mountain's heart, thousands of goblins now lived in the darkness, an entire civilization that had never known the sun. They mined for iron and silver, fought among themselves, raided the lands below the mountain, and generally made a nuisance of themselves. Gollum watched them from the shadows, invisible in his ring, learning their ways. They were organized after a fashion, ruled by a great goblin king who sat on a throne of carved stone deep in the largest cavern. They had soldiers, workers, slaves captured from the surface world. They had forges where they made weapons and armor. They had markets where they traded goods stolen from travelers. It was from these markets that Gollum did most of his stealing now. The goblins were better supplied than the orc patrols had been, with stores of dried meat, hard cheese, even vegetables brought up from below. A Gollum would slip through the crowded marketplace, invisible and silent, and help himself to whatever he fancied. He had become expert at it over the long years. He knew exactly how much weight he could lift without the vendor noticing. He knew which goblins were alert and which were lazy. He knew the patrol schedules, the shift changes, all the little rhythms of goblin life. Sometimes he would take things just for the pleasure of it, not because he needed them, but because he could. A shiny buckle, a pretty stone, a scrap of cloth in a color he hadn't seen in decades. These treasures he would bring back to his cave and arrange around his sleeping place like a dragon with its hoard. though none of them were as precious as his ring. The ring. Always the ring. It consumed his thoughts, dominated his every waking moment. He would sit for hours, days, just looking at it, turning it over in his fingers, whispering to it. The ring had become more than an object. It was his companion, his confidant, the only thing in the world that understood him. "We loves it precious," he would murmur. "Loves it more than anything. More than sun, more than grass, more than. But sometimes he couldn't finish the sentence. Because sometimes buried deep beneath the obsession, a small voice would ask, "More than Déagol? More than grandmother? More than yourself?" And the answer, terrible and true, was yes. Yes to all of it. He had learned to hunt goblins when he was hungry enough and fish weren't sufficient. It was dangerous, far more dangerous than stealing food, but the ring made it possible. He would follow a lone goblin, one who had strayed from the group or was standing guard in some remote passage. Then he would strike, quick and silent, his hands around their throat before they could cry out. He didn't eat them. Even Gollum, as far as he had fallen, couldn't bring himself to do that. But he would take their supplies, their weapons sometimes, anything useful, and he would leave the bodies in dark corners where they wouldn't be found quickly, giving him time to escape before the alarm was raised. The goblins blamed these disappearances on rival factions, on cave-ins, on the various dangers of living in the mountain. They never suspected the truth, that something small and pale and impossibly old was hunting them in the darkness. But there were close calls. Once, a goblin guard had turned at just the wrong moment, just as Gollum was reaching for a supply pack. The goblin's eyes had passed right over him, seeing nothing. But some instinct had made the creature suspicious. It had called for backup, and suddenly Gollum was surrounded by a dozen armed goblins, all searching for an intruder they couldn't see. He had pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing, as they searched the area. One goblin had come so close that Gollum could have counted the warts on its nose, but the ring held, kept him hidden, and eventually the goblins had given up and moved on, grumbling about false alarms and jumpy guards. Gollum had fled back to his lake, his heart hammering, and hadn't ventured into the goblin town for a month. The risk was becoming too great. He was getting old, slower, even with the ring's power. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and they would catch him. And if they caught him, they would take his precious. That thought, more than any fear of death or torture, terrified him. The ring was everything. Without it, he was nothing. Just a twisted creature, ancient and alone, with nothing to show for all his years but a cave full of stolen trinkets and memories of murder. The seasons turned far above, spring to summer to fall to winter, year after year. Gollum knew nothing of these changes, locked in his eternal darkness. But sometimes he would feel something, a heaviness in the air, perhaps, or a change in the water temperature, and he would think, winter now. Or summer has come. Some deep part of him, some remnant of the hobbit he had been, still responded to the turning of the year. And in those moments the memories would come flooding back, strong and vivid and painful as fresh wounds He would remember harvest festivals with tables groaning under the weight of food and everyone in the village gathered together. He would remember summer swimming in the river, the water warm and clean, Déagol doing silly dives off the dock. He would remember winter evenings by his grandmother's fire, listening to her stories while snow fell outside. "Stop," he would whisper, clutching his head. "Stop, stop, stop, don't want to remember, hurts to remember." But the memories wouldn't stop. They would play out in his mind with perfect clarity, and he would live through them again, experience the joy and warmth and belonging he had once known. And then they would fade, leaving him alone in the dark, more aware than ever of everything he had lost. In these moments, he would sometimes pull the ring from his finger and hold it at arm's length, looking at it with something approaching hate. "You did this," he would say. "You took everything, everything." But even as he spoke, his hand would tremble with the need to put it back on. And within minutes, sometimes seconds, he would slip it back onto his finger, and the hate would transform into love, fierce and desperate and all-consuming. "No, no, we didn't mean it, precious. We loves you best. You is all we has. Sorry, so sorry." The ring never responded. It just sat on his finger, warm and heavy, waiting. Over the years, Gollum had explored vast sections of the mountain. He had found caverns so large their ceilings were lost in darkness hundreds of feet above. He had crawled through passages so tight he had to exhale completely to squeeze through. He had discovered underground rivers that roared through carved channels, and silent pools where the water was so still it looked like black glass. In one chamber, he found mushrooms growing in great clusters, pale and ghostly, feeding on bat droppings and whatever nutrients filtered down from above. He learned which ones were edible and which would make him sick. The edible ones became a supplement to his diet of fish, adding variety to his meals. In another chamber, he found crystals growing from the walls, long translucent spears that chimed when he touched them. He would sometimes come here just to make music, tapping the crystals in different patterns, creating eerie melodies that echoed through the darkness. It was the closest thing to beauty he had in his life now. And deep in the mountain's roots, he found a chamber filled with old bones, not animal bones, but the bones of men. Ancient warriors, perhaps, who had ventured into the mountain and never come out. Their armor and weapons lay scattered among the bones, rusted and useless, but Gollum had taken a sword anyway. Not to use, he had no skill with such things, but because it had a pretty pommel with a red stone. These explorations broke up the monotony of his existence, gave him something to do besides fish and steal and obsess over his ring. But they also reminded him of how vast the world was, how small he was, how utterly alone. The mountain went on forever, in all directions, and he was just one tiny creature scuttling through its depths, insignificant and forgotten. Sometimes he wondered if anyone on the surface even remembered him. His family must be long dead, generations gone. The village where he had lived probably didn't even exist anymore. The river folk might have moved on, found new places to fish, new homes to build. He might be the last of his kind, the last one who remembered what the Gladden fields looked like in spring. But probably not. Probably hobbits still lived there, or somewhere, going about their lives in the sun, having birthdays and celebrations, falling in love and raising families, living and dying in the normal way with normal spans of years, while he endured, unchanging, undying, trapped in amber, preserved by the ring's power in this state of half-life. "Is this forever?" he would sometimes ask the darkness. "Is this all there is?" The darkness never answered. One day, and he marked this day in his memory because it was so unusual, he saw the sun. Not directly. He had ventured nowhere near the surface in decades. But a shaft of light, pure and golden, came filtering down through some crack or crevice far above, cutting through the darkness like a sword. It fell directly into his lake, illuminating the water, showing depths he had never clearly seen. Gollum had shrunk back from it, hissing, his eyes hurting from the brightness. But he couldn't look away. The light was beautiful, painful, wonderful, terrible. It made the water glow like liquid gold. It showed him fish swimming in schools, their pale bodies flashing silver. It revealed the lake's true size, much larger than he had thought, stretching away into the darkness. And it reminded him that there was a world above, a world of light and color and life, a world he had left behind, or that had left him behind. He wasn't sure which anymore. He watched the light for as long as it lasted, perhaps 10 minutes, perhaps 20. Then clouds must have shifted overhead, or the sun moved in its arc because the light faded, dimmed, and was gone. The darkness returned comfortable and familiar, and Gollum breathed a sigh of something like relief. But for days afterward, he couldn't stop thinking about it. That glimpse of gold, that brief moment of beauty. It haunted him, reminded him of things he had buried deep. He found himself thinking about Déagol more in those days, really thinking about him, not just the moment of his death, but everything that had come before, all the years of friendship, all the good times they had shared. Déagol had been kind, generous, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. He had been a good person, a genuinely good person. And Gollum had killed him for a ring, for a piece of metal. "He would have taken it from us," Gollum whispered to himself, trying to justify it as he had justified it 1,000 times before. He wouldn't share. It was ours by rights. But the words rang hollow. Déagol would have shared. That's who he was. If Sméagol had just asked, just explained, maybe they could have worked something out. Taken turns with the ring. Used it together somehow. But Sméagol hadn't asked. He had just taken. And in taking, he had destroyed everything. "We is sorry," Gollum said to the darkness. And for once he meant it, really, truly meant it. "We is sorry, Déagol. We didn't. We shouldn't have. But Déagol couldn't hear him. Déagol was dead, had been dead for centuries, was dust and bones and fading memory. All the apologies in the world wouldn't bring him back. Gollum curled up in his cave and wept. Or tried to. His eyes were so dry, his body so desiccated that no tears would come. Just dry, hitching sobs that hurt his throat and made his chest ache. "Oh, what have I become?" he asked. Not we, not his usual speech. I, Sméagol, asking the question that Gollum refused to answer. A monster. That's what he had become. A creature of darkness and theft and murder. Everything he had once despised, everything he had once feared. He was the villain in the stories his grandmother used to tell. The evil thing that lurked in caves and preyed on the innocent. And the ring sat on his finger, warm and patient, waiting for the moment of weakness to pass. Because it always passed. The guilt and horror and self-loathing would fade, as they always did, and Gollum would emerge again, stronger than Sméagol, more suited to survival in the darkness. The ring didn't need Sméagol. It needed Gollum. And so Gollum was what he would be. The years rolled on. The goblin town grew larger. The mountains slowly eroded, grain by grain, as mountains do. And Gollum endured fishing his lake, stealing from the goblins, talking to his precious in the endless dark. He had become part of the mountain's legend now, part of its history. The creature in the deep places, the thief in the dark, the keeper of the lake. Goblins would dare each other to venture into his territory, but few did, and those who did rarely came back. He had achieved a kind of peace, if you could call it that, an acceptance of what he was, what he had become. The past was gone. The future didn't matter. There was only now, this eternal present, this endless cycle of hunt and eat and sleep and wake. And always, always, the ring, his precious, his curse, his everything, forever and ever and ever. The day began like any other day in the timeless darkness. Gollum woke in his cave, checked that his precious was still safe around his neck, and made his way down to the water's edge to begin his morning fishing. The lake was calm, its surface like black glass, and he waded in slowly, feeling the familiar cold wrap around his legs. He had just caught his first fish, a nice fat one that would make a good breakfast, when he heard something that made him freeze. Voices, distant, echoing through the passages that led to his lake. But these weren't goblin voices, harsh and guttural. These were different, higher pitch, speaking in a language he half remembered from long ago. Gollum slipped the ring onto his finger instantly and faded from sight. He moved toward the shore, every sense alert, trying to locate the source of the sound. The voices were coming closer, along with other sounds. Running feet, the clash of weapons, shouts and screams. Then he understood a battle. The goblins must have captured someone, and that someone was trying to escape. It happened occasionally. Some unlucky traveler would be dragged into the mountain, and the goblins would make sport of them before the end. Usually Gollum ignored these incidents. They were none of his business, and getting involved was dangerous. But his curiosity was piqued. It had been so long since he'd heard voices that weren't goblin snarls. So he crept closer to the main passage, staying invisible, staying silent. What he saw made his eyes widen. A group of maybe a dozen people, though people wasn't quite right, were fighting their way through a goblin horde. They were shorter even than men usually were, with hairy feet and round faces. Dwarves, his memory supplied. No, not quite. Dwarves were stockier, more heavily built. These were something else. And there, at the back of the group, struggling to keep up, was the smallest of them all, hardly more than a child by the look of him, though his face suggested he was older than he appeared. He had curly brown hair and was dressed in good quality clothes, now torn and filthy from the tunnels, and he looked absolutely terrified. The group was being driven back by sheer numbers. More and more goblins poured into the passage, their weapons flashing in the torchlight. The small people were brave, fighting with swords and axes, but they were outnumbered 10-1. Gollum watched, fascinated despite himself. It had been so long since he'd seen such chaos, such life and energy. Even if it was violent life, violent energy. Then something happened. In the confusion of the battle, the small one at the back, the frightened-looking one, stumbled. A goblin lunged at him, and he rolled aside desperately. The movement carried him away from his companions into a side passage. The goblins were too focused on the main group to notice, and within seconds he had vanished into the darkness. Gollum's first instinct was to return to his lake. This was none of his concern. Let the goblins and the intruders sort out their own problems. He had his precious to protect, his territory to guard, but something made him hesitate. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the memory of what it was like to be lost and frightened in the dark. Or perhaps it was something deeper, some remnant of Sméagol that responded to the sight of someone in trouble. He followed the small person into the side passage, invisible and silent as a ghost. The creature, for Gollum didn't know what else to call him, was stumbling through the dark, one hand on the wall, clearly terrified. He kept looking back over his shoulder, expecting pursuit. He had drawn a small sword, hardly more than a large dagger, really, and held it in front of him with shaking hands. Gollum watched him with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. Stupid thing, running deeper into the mountain instead of trying to find a way out. Didn't he know that down here there was nothing but darkness and death? The creature reached a junction where 3 passages met and stopped, confused. He was breathing hard on the edge of panic. And then, as Gollum watched, the creature did something extraordinary. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. A handkerchief, here in the darkness, running for his life from goblins, and he stopped to wipe his face with a handkerchief as if he were at a garden party. Despite everything, despite the centuries of isolation and bitterness, Gollum felt something like amusement. What kind of creature carried a handkerchief into a goblin lair? The small person chose the middle passage, the one that would, though he didn't know it, lead eventually to Gollum's lake. Gollum followed, still invisible, keeping a safe distance. He told himself he was just making sure the intruder didn't stumble into his home. Just keeping watch. Nothing more. But as he followed, something else stirred in him. A desire, not strong yet but growing, to talk, to hear a voice that wasn't his own echo, to have, just for a moment, some kind of interaction with another living being that wasn't trying to kill him. It had been so long, so terribly, achingly long. The creature made his way deeper, moving slowly now, exhausted and lost. Several times he stopped to rest, sitting with his back against the wall, his little sword across his knees. Once, Gollum heard him mutter something to himself. Oh, what a mess! What an absolute mess! Why did I ever leave home? Bacon and eggs and a comfortable chair. That's what I should be enjoying right now. Not goblins and darkness and getting thoroughly lost in a mountain. The voice was educated, refined even. The accent reminded Gollum of something from his old life, though he couldn't quite place it. It made his chest ache in a way he didn't understand. Finally, after what must have been hours of wandering, the creature emerged into Gollum's cavern. He stood at the entrance, looking out at the vast darkness, and even without being able to see his face clearly, Gollum could sense his despair. Oh no. Oh no, no, no. A dead end. I'm done for. The creature sat down heavily on the rocky ground, and in the faint phosphorescent light from the mosses, Gollum could see tears on his face. Actual tears. When had Gollum last cried real tears? He couldn't remember. This was Gollum's moment to strike, if he was going to. The creature was defenseless, exhausted, despairing. One quick attack, and he could eliminate this threat to his territory, take whatever supplies the creature carried, and return to his peaceful existence. But something held him back. Some curiosity about what kind of being this was. Some desire to talk, to interact, to remember what it was like to be part of the world instead of just a shadow haunting its edges. Gollum moved closer, still invisible until he was only a few feet away. He could smell the creature now, the smell of soap and good food and pipe tobacco. Smells from another world, a world of sunlight and comfort. He took the ring off. The creature jumped at the sudden appearance, scrambling backward, raising his little sword with a shaking hand. In the dim light, Gollum could see him clearly now. Yes, definitely some kind of small person. His face was round and honest, with bright eyes that were currently wide with fear. What are you?" the creature stammered. Gollum tilted his head, studying him. "We might ask you the same, yes. What is it, precious? What is this thing in our home?" I'm Bilbo. Bilbo Baggins of the Shire. I'm a hobbit." The word hit Gollum like a physical blow. Hobbit. He knew that word. Knew it from so long ago it seemed like a dream. The river folk, some called themselves hobbits. He had been. "Ah, hobbit," he repeated, his voice strange. We were, once we were." Bilbo lowered his sword slightly, confusion replacing some of the fear. You were a hobbit, but you look so different. Yes, yes, Precious has changed us. Long years in the dark, oh yes, long, long years. Gollum moved closer, and Bilbo raised the sword again. Nasty little sword, won't help you. No, no, we is faster, cleverer. I don't want to fight, Bilbo said quickly. I'm lost. I just want to find my way out of this dreadful mountain and catch up with my companions. Lost, is it? Yes, yes, easy to get lost. We knows these tunnels, every twist and turn. We could show you the way. Oh, yes. Hope flared in Bilbo's eyes. You could? You'd help me? Gollum's mind was racing. This creature, this Bilbo had something. He could feel it. Not treasure, not in the traditional sense, but something useful. And more than that, he wanted to talk. Wanted to engage in something other than his own circular thoughts. Maybe yes, maybe no. Depends, doesn't it, Precious? Depends on whether we likes you, whether we finds you interesting. An idea was forming, beautiful in its simplicity. A game, a test, something he hadn't done in so very long. We shall have a competition, Gollum said, his eyes gleaming. Yes, yes, a game. If Baggins wins, we shows him the way out. If we wins, well. He showed his teeth in what might have been a smile. We eats him, all fair and square, yes. Bilbo went pale. Eat me? Now see here, that's hardly sporting. Oh, but it is a riddle game, Precious. We asks each other riddles, and if we can't answer, we loses. Simple, yes. Fair, yes. Gollum could see Bilbo thinking, weighing his options. The hobbit clearly didn't have many choices. He was lost, exhausted, and had no idea how to find his way out. At least this game gave him a chance. A riddle game, Bilbo said slowly. Very well, but you must promise. If I win, you'll lead me to the nearest exit. No tricks. No tricks, no tricks. We promises, Precious. We promises on our honor. He couldn't quite bring himself to say the word precious about the ring in front of the stranger. We promises true. Now, shall we begin? Ladies first, yes, yes, you asks first. Bilbo sat down, clearly trying to gather his thoughts. Gollum settled onto a rock nearby, his large eyes fixed on the hobbit. This was delicious. This was entertainment. This was something other than the endless monotony of his existence. All right, Bilbo said finally. What has roots as nobody sees is taller than trees. Up, up it goes and yet never grows. Gollum's laugh echoed through the cavern. Easy, too easy. Mountain, yes, yes, mountains has roots under the ground. Grows tall but never grows bigger. Our turn, our turn. He thought for a moment, drawing on memories of riddles his grandmother had taught him centuries ago. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. What is it, Precious? What is it? Bilbo frowned, thinking. Gollum watched him eagerly. This was fun. This was actually fun. When had he last had fun? Teeth, Bilbo said finally, and Gollum clapped his hands in delight. Good, Baggins is clever, yes, cleverer than we thought. Your turn, your turn. The game continued, riddle after riddle. Some were easy, traditional riddles that any child might know. Others were harder, requiring real thought and cleverness. Gollum found himself enjoying it immensely. His mind, so long turned inward, so long focused only on his ring and his territory, was suddenly engaged in something external. The mental exercise was exhilarating. Bilbo proved to be a worthy opponent. He knew riddles Gollum had never heard, and he solved Gollum's riddles with impressive speed. They traded back and forth, the stakes forgotten for the moment, both caught up in the joy of the game. Alive without breath, Gollum posed, cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, never clinking. Fish, Bilbo said confidently. Fish in armor of scales. Yes, good, Baggins knows his riddles. But as the game went on, Gollum noticed something. Bilbo kept putting his hand in his pocket, as if checking on something. Once, twice, 3 times. The gesture was nervous, almost unconscious. What did he have in there? It was Bilbo's turn to ask. He seemed to be struggling, running out of riddles he knew. His hand went to his pocket again, and his face took on a distracted look. What have I got in my pocket? He said almost to himself. Gollum froze. That's not a riddle. That's not fair. Baggins must ask us a proper riddle. But even as he protested, Gollum's mind was racing. What was in the pocket? Why did Bilbo keep checking it? Why was the question so important that it had slipped out? 3 guesses? Precious? Gollum heard himself say, though he wasn't sure why. We gets 3 guesses, yes. Bilbo looked confused, but nodded. All right. 3 guesses. Gollum's mind worked frantically. What would a hobbit carry in his pocket? String or nothing? Wrong, Bilbo said, and there was a note of relief in his voice. Guess again. Knife, Gollum tried. Hobbits carried knives sometimes for cutting rope or food. Wrong again. Bilbo's confidence was growing. Last guess. Gollum felt a growing panic, not because he would lose the game, though that stung, but because he realized, with sudden cold clarity, what Bilbo might have in that pocket. It couldn't be. It couldn't. But the way Bilbo kept checking, the way his hand lingered there protectively. Show us, Gollum demanded. Show us what is in your nasty little pocket. Bilbo stood up, his hand on his sword. That wasn't a guess. You've lost. You have to keep your promise and show me the way out. Yes, we will. We just needs to get something first. Precious. Wait here. Yes, we'll be right back. Gollum scurried toward his cave, his heart pounding. He needed to check, needed to see if his terrible suspicion was true. He reached his sleeping place and felt around in the darkness where he always kept his precious when he wasn't wearing it. Nothing. He felt again, more frantically. Still nothing. No, he whispered. No. He tore through his small hoard, scattering stones and trinkets. He checked every crack, every crevice. But he already knew. He knew with a certainty that made his chest feel like it was being crushed. His precious was gone. The scream that tore from his throat was barely human, a sound of pure anguish and rage. Everything in his world had just collapsed. The one thing that mattered, the only thing that had kept him alive through centuries of darkness and isolation, was gone, and he knew where it was. In Baggins's pocket. The thief, the nasty, tricksy thief, had stolen it. Gollum raced back to where he'd left Bilbo, but the hobbit was already moving, making his way toward one of the exit passages. He must have heard the scream, must have realized that something was wrong. "Thief! Thief! Baggins, we knows, you has it, you has our precious." Bilbo broke into a run, and Gollum pursued, moving faster than he had moved in decades. The hobbit was surprisingly quick for someone so short and plump, but Gollum was faster. He was gaining, would catch him in moments. But then something happened. Bilbo stumbled, and as he fell, something slipped from his hand. In the faint light, Gollum saw it. A ring. A golden ring. His ring! Bilbo grabbed for it desperately, and his hand closed around it, and he vanished. Gollum skidded to a stop, confused. Where had he gone? He'd been right there, right there. He sniffed the air, listening for breathing, for movement. There. He could hear the soft sound of footsteps, could sense a presence even if he couldn't see it. "Oh, clever, clever Baggins," he hissed. "Put it on, did you? Using our precious against us? Tricksy, false." He lunged toward where he thought Bilbo was, but his hands closed on empty air. The hobbit had moved, was running now, faster and more confidently. He knew the ring's power now, knew he was invisible. Gollum chased the sounds, the faint footfalls, the whisper of breath. But Bilbo was moving toward the exit passages, the ones that led up and out. Gollum knew these passages, but so did the goblins. If he chased Bilbo into those tunnels, he might be seen, might be caught. But his precious, he couldn't let it go. He had to get it back. He followed Bilbo through the twisting passages, always just behind, never quite catching up. The hobbit was using the ring well, staying silent, moving quickly, and he seemed to have a sense of direction, heading steadily upward. Finally, they reached a place Gollum knew well. A guard post usually manned by goblins, but currently empty. Beyond it, a passage that led to the outside. To the dreaded outside, with its sun and sky and open spaces. Bilbo paused at the entrance, and Gollum knew he was there, could sense him even through the ring's magic. But the hobbit wasn't alone. Voices echoed from further up the passage. Goblins coming down. Bilbo would have to squeeze past them, invisible but still physical. If they blocked the passage, if they stood in the way, he would be caught. Gollum crouched in the shadows, watching, waiting. Part of him hoped the goblins would catch the thief, would take his precious from him. But another part, a smaller part that still remembered what it was like to be kind, hoped Bilbo would make it, hoped he would escape. Because despite everything, despite the theft and the loss, that had been fun. That riddle game, that interaction, that brief connection with another being. It had reminded Gollum of what it meant to be alive, to be more than just a creature of appetite and possession. The goblins were close now. Bilbo would have to move, and he did, slipping past the first goblin with inches to spare. Gollum saw the goblin pause, sniffing the air, but then shrugging and moving on. Bilbo was through. He was going to make it. Gollum stood at the edge of his territory, watching the invisible hobbit flee toward freedom. His precious, his treasure, the one thing that had sustained him through centuries of darkness, was leaving, going away, gone. Thief, he whispered, but there was no real anger in it anymore. Just loss, just emptiness. Baggins is a thief, but clever, oh yes, clever enough to answer the riddles, clever enough to escape. He turned and made his way back to his lake, back to his cave, back to his empty, hollow existence. But now it was even more empty. Now it was hollow in a way it had never been before. His precious was gone, and Gollum, for the first time in longer than he could remember, felt truly, utterly alone. He sat on his rocky beach, staring out at the dark water, and thought about the hobbit, Bilbo Baggins of the Shire. The name was burned into his memory now, seared there with brands of loss and rage. "We will find it again," he whispered to the darkness. "Oh yes, we will. Baggins can't keep it forever. It belongs to us. It will come back to us, or we will come for it." And deep down, deeper than thought, deeper than reason, Gollum knew this was true. The ring would call to him. He would feel it no matter how far away it was, and he would search, would hunt, would never rest until he had it back. His precious had left him. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a new hunt. A hunt that would take him out of his safe darkness, out into the world he had hidden from for so long. The thought terrified him, but the thought of living without his precious terrified him more. Somewhere far above, Bilbo Baggins emerged into sunlight, blinking and amazed to be alive. And in the depths below, Gollum sat in darkness and planned and waited. The riddle game was over. But the real game, the game that would shape the fate of the world, was just beginning. For 3 days after Bilbo escaped, Gollum didn't leave his cave. He curled up in his sleeping place, the place where his precious should have been, and rocked back and forth, muttering endlessly to himself. "Gone, gone, it's gone. Our precious is gone. Stolen by tricksy Baggins, nasty hobbit thief. But we needs it, we does. Can't live without it. Won't live without it." He refused to eat, though his stomach cramped with hunger. He refused to fish, though the lake teemed with food. What was the point? Without his precious, nothing mattered. Food was just ash. Sleep was just nightmares. Existence was just endless, grinding pain. But on the 4th day, something changed. The despair began to transform into something else, something harder, sharper, more focused. Anger. Not the hot, explosive anger of the moment he discovered the theft, but cold, calculating rage that burned steady as a forge fire. Baggins had his precious, but Baggins was mortal, vulnerable. He could be found. He could be followed. He could be made to give it back. Gollum stood up, his legs shaky from 3 days without food. He made his way to the water and caught fish mechanically, eating without tasting. He needed strength. He needed to be ready, because he was going to leave his sanctuary, leave his safe darkness, and venture out into the world above. The thought terrified him. He hadn't been on the surface in how long? Centuries. The sun would burn his eyes, hurt his skin. The open sky would make him feel exposed and small. There would be dangers he'd forgotten, threats he was no longer equipped to handle. But none of that mattered. His precious was out there, and he would find it or die trying. He spent the next week preparing. He gathered what few supplies he had, wrapping dried fish in leaves, filling a small water skin he'd stolen from the goblins years ago. He practiced moving in the upper passages, the ones where faint light filtered down from above, forcing his eyes to adjust, to remember how to see in something other than total darkness. And he planned his route. The goblins had maps, crude things scratched onto stone tablets showing the tunnels and passages throughout the mountain. Gollum had seen these maps during his stealing expeditions, had memorized them out of simple curiosity. Now that knowledge would serve him. There was an exit, a small one used by goblin scouts that opened onto the eastern slopes of the mountain. It was rarely guarded, considered too small and remote to be worth watching. That would be his way out. On the 8th day after Bilbo's escape, Gollum made his way to that exit. The passage was narrow, forcing him to crawl in places, and it sloped steadily upward. As he climbed, he became aware of something he hadn't experienced in so long he'd almost forgotten what it was. A breeze, air that moved, that carried scents from the outside world. He paused, breathing it in. Grass, trees, growing things. The smell made him feel ill and excited all at once. This was the smell of the world he'd left behind, the world that had cast him out. And now he was going back. The passage ended in a crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. Beyond it, Gollum could see light, real light, not the faint glow of mushrooms or phosphorescent moss, but actual daylight filtering through clouds. He waited until evening, watching the light fade from harsh white to soft gray to the gentle darkness of dusk. Only then did he dare to emerge. The world outside hit him like a physical blow. The sky, vast and open, stretching away into infinity. The air fresh and cold and moving constantly. The sounds, birds calling, wind in the trees, a stream somewhere nearby. After centuries in the mountain silence, it was overwhelming. Gollum pressed himself against the rock face, fighting the urge to crawl back into his safe hole. But no, his precious was out there somewhere. He had to be brave, had to be strong. For our precious, he whispered. We does this for our precious. He moved at night, always at night. The darkness was his ally, his comfort. During the day, he would hide in whatever shelter he could find. Caves, if he was lucky, hollow trees, once a culvert under a road, where he pressed himself into the shadows and watched the feet of travelers pass overhead. His eyes adjusted gradually to the light, though it still hurt, still made him squint and water. His skin, pale from centuries underground, burned easily in the sun. He learned to wrap himself in stolen cloth, to cover his head and hands, to move like a ghost through the twilight hours. He had no real plan, not at first. Just a direction. West. Bilbo had come from the west, from something called the Shire. That's where the hobbit would return if he'd survived the journey. That's where Gollum would find him. But the world was large, terrifyingly large. He'd forgotten, or perhaps never truly known, just how vast it was. The mountain had been his entire universe for so long that the idea of distance, of miles and leagues and days of travel, had become abstract. Now it became real. He walked for weeks, moving slowly, stopping often to hide or rest or simply cope with the overwhelming sensory input. Every smell was too strong, every sound too loud, every sight too bright, too colorful, too much. He avoided people whenever possible. Twice he saw farmers working in fields, and he hid until they were gone, watching them with a mixture of longing and fear. They looked so normal, so ordinary, living their simple lives under the sun. Had he ever been like that? It seemed impossible now. Once he saw children playing by a stream, and he stopped to watch, hidden behind a tree. They were laughing, splashing each other, so innocent and joyful. For a moment, just a moment, he remembered being young, remembered playing in the Gladden fields with Déagol before everything went wrong. The memory hurt so much he had to move on, stumbling through the forest with tears he could no longer cry burning behind his eyes. He stole to survive. Food from farms, clothes from washing lines, once a whole cooked chicken cooling on a windowsill. He felt no guilt about it. The world had taken everything from him. It owed him this much at least. As he traveled, he began to hear things, rumors, stories, whispered conversations in the villages he skirted, news carried by travelers on the roads. There was trouble in the east, dark things stirring, orcs raiding more boldly, some great power growing in a place called Mordor. The name meant nothing to Gollum, but it made people afraid, and that fear was interesting. Wherever this Mordor was, whatever power grew there, it was changing the world, making it darker, more dangerous. But Gollum had his own darkness, his own danger. He didn't care about the wider world's troubles. He only cared about his precious. He reached the edge of Mirkwood, the great forest that stretched for hundreds of miles, and paused. The forest was dark, darker than seemed natural. The trees grew close together, blocking out most of the sunlight even at midday. Strange sounds echoed through the gloom, and the air had a thick, oppressive quality. But it was perfect for Gollum. Darkness he could handle. Darkness was safety. He entered the forest and felt immediately more comfortable. This was closer to his mountain home, all shadows and silence and hidden danger. He could move more freely here, didn't have to hide as much during the day. He followed game trails deeper into the forest, eating whatever he could catch. Rabbits mostly, and once a young deer that he'd surprised at a stream. The fresh meat tasted strange after so many years of fish, but it filled his belly and gave him strength. It was in Mirkwood that he had his first encounter with orcs since leaving the mountain. He heard them before he saw them, their harsh voices cutting through the forest silence. A patrol, maybe 6 or 7 of them, moving through the trees with weapons drawn. Gollum's first instinct was to hide, to let them pass. But then he heard what they were saying, and he froze. "The master wants information," one orc was growling. "About a ring, a magic ring lost somewhere in the north." Gollum's heart began to pound. They were talking about his precious. They had to be. How many magic rings could there be? "What's so special about it?" another orc asked. "Dunno, just that the master wants it real bad. Says there's rewards for anyone who brings word of it." "Big rewards? How are we supposed to find one little ring in all this? We're not stupid. We're supposed to watch for people acting strange. People who have things they shouldn't have. People who disappear. That's the word from Dol Guldur. Gollum filed the name away. Somewhere important. Somewhere powerful. Somewhere that was also looking for his precious. The orcs moved on, and Gollum stayed hidden, his mind racing. Others were searching for the ring. That complicated things. If he found Baggins, if he got his precious back, these orcs and their master would come looking for it, would try to take it. Well, they could try. His precious belonged to him and him alone. No orc, no master, no power in the world would take it from him again. But it was troubling. The world was more dangerous than he'd thought. There were players in this game he didn't understand. Forces at work beyond his comprehension. He continued west, but more carefully now, watching not just for threats, but for information. Listening to travelers, to merchants, to anyone who might have news. And slowly, a picture began to form. There was indeed a great power in the east, in Mordor. A dark lord, some said, returned after long years of hiding. He was gathering armies, searching for something. Some spoke of a ring, a magic ring of power lost long ago. Gollum's precious. It had to be. But how did this dark lord know about it? What made it so important? The questions troubled him, but they didn't change his purpose. He had to find Baggins, had to get his precious back. Everything else was secondary. He reached the western edge of Mirkwood after weeks of travel and paused at the forest's edge. Beyond lay open country, and beyond that, if his understanding was correct, something called the Misty Mountains, and beyond those, the Shire. But he was exhausted. Months of travel, of constant stress and fear had worn him down. He needed rest, needed time to recover his strength. He found a cave, not a large one, but enough for his needs, and made camp. He spent a week there, hunting and eating and sleeping, rebuilding his energy, and thinking. What would he do when he found Baggins? He couldn't just take the ring by force. The hobbit might have friends, protection. And if he killed Baggins, others might come looking, might ask questions. No, he needed to be clever about this. Needed to watch and wait for the right moment. Baggins might not even still have the ring. Might have lost it or given it away. Gollum would need to be sure before he acted. As he rested in his temporary cave, Gollum became aware of something strange. A feeling, faint but persistent, like a gentle pulling somewhere deep in his chest. It was pointing west, in the direction he'd been traveling. The ring, he could feel it. Not clearly, not enough to know exactly where it was, but enough to know the general direction. The connection between him and his precious, forged over centuries of possession was still there. We can find it, he whispered to himself, wonder and relief mixing in his voice. We can feel it precious. It's calling to us. The sensation gave him new strength. He left his cave and continued west, following that faint pull. It led him around the misty mountains rather than through them, a longer route but safer. He had no desire to encounter the goblins of his old home. They might recognize him, might remember the strange creature that had lived by their lake. Better to avoid them entirely. The journey took months. Summer faded into autumn, autumn into winter. Gollum suffered through the cold, unused to weather after so long underground. He stole warmer clothes, wrapped himself in whatever he could find, and kept moving. And always that pull grew stronger. He was getting closer. His precious was near. But then something changed. The pull shifted, began moving. The ring was traveling, being carried east, back the way Gollum had come. No, 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 he hissed in frustration. Where is Baggins going? Nasty, tricksy hobbit can't stay in one place. He changed direction, following the pull. It led him south, then east, then south again. A wandering path that made no sense. What was Baggins doing? Why was he traveling so much? The pull grew stronger and then frustratingly stopped. Somewhere to the east, not too far now, his precious had settled in one place, waiting. Gollum increased his pace, desperate now. He was close, so close. Just a few more days, maybe a week, and he would have it back. But as he traveled, he became aware of increased orc activity. More patrols, more soldiers, all moving with purpose. The orcs were organized now, following orders, part of some greater plan. And their path was taking them in the same direction Gollum was going, toward wherever his precious had stopped. This was dangerous, very dangerous. The orcs were looking for the ring, and they were converging on the same location Gollum was. If he wasn't careful, he might lead them right to it. Or worse, they might get there first. He pushed himself harder, moving during the day now, despite the discomfort, barely stopping to rest. The pull in his chest was strong now, unmistakable. His precious was close. So close he could almost feel it, almost taste it. But then one evening, as he crept through a rocky ravine, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. An orc patrol, larger than any he'd seen before. 20 orcs, maybe more, all heavily armed, and with them something else. Something tall and cloaked, radiating a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. Gollum pressed himself against the rocks, making himself as small as possible. Whatever that thing was, it terrified him in a way even the orcs didn't. It was wrong somehow, fundamentally wrong, like a hole in the world. The patrol passed close enough that Gollum could hear their conversation. "The ring wraith says the ring is near," one orc was saying. "Orders are to search every village, every house, find it and bring it to the Dark Tower. What if someone resists? Kill them. The master wants the ring, not prisoners." Gollum waited until they were long gone before he dared to move. Ring wraith, Dark Tower. The names meant nothing to him, but the threat was clear. Others were hunting his precious, and they were close. He had to get there first. Had to reach his precious before these servants of darkness did. The ring belonged to him. He had paid for it with everything he was, everything he'd been. No Dark Lord, no wraith, no power in the world had more claim to it than he did. Gollum moved through the night like a ghost, following that pull in his chest. Soon, he promised himself, soon he would have it back. Soon everything would be right again. And if anyone tried to stop him, anyone tried to take his precious, well, they would learn what it meant to cross Gollum. They would learn just how dangerous a creature could be when it had nothing left to lose but the one thing it loved. The hunt was nearing its end. One way or another, Gollum would have his precious back, or he would die trying. Gollum crept through the undergrowth of Mirkwood, moving as silently as he had once moved through the caves of his mountain home. The forest had changed since he'd passed through it before, grown darker, more oppressive. The very air seemed thick with malice, and even creatures like him who loved the dark felt uneasy here. But his precious was ahead. He could feel it stronger than ever, so close now, perhaps only days away. He would endure any discomfort, any danger to reach it. He was following a game trail when he heard voices. Not orcs this time, but something else. Lighter voices speaking a language he half recognized. Elvish, his ancient memory supplied. The wood elves lived in this forest, had their kingdom somewhere in its depths. Gollum's first instinct was to hide, to let them pass. Elves were dangerous, with keen eyes that could pierce even the deepest shadows. But curiosity held him. What were elves doing this deep in the dark parts of the forest? He crept closer, using every skill he developed over centuries of stalking. Through the trees he could see them. A patrol, maybe a dozen elves in green and brown, moving quietly through the forest. They were searching for something, checking behind trees, looking up into the branches. "The spiders have been more active," one elf was saying. "We found 3 cocoons yesterday, all with travelers inside. Dead, unfortunately." "The darkness spreads," another replied. "Even the trees are sick now. We're fighting a losing battle. Gollum watched them pass, staying perfectly still. But one elf, a tall one with sharp features, paused. His head turned in Gollum's direction, and his eyes narrowed. "Something's here," he said softly. "I can feel it." Gollum's heart began to race. He hadn't been seen, he was certain of it. But the elf was sensing something, some disturbance in the forest's natural rhythm. "Probably just another spider," a companion said. "This whole forest is crawling with them." "No, something else. Something that doesn't belong." The elves began to spread out, searching the area around where Gollum hid. He could run, but they would hear him, would give chase. He could try to fight, but there were too many, and elves were skilled warriors. His only chance was to remain perfectly still and hope they didn't find him. But luck, which had served him well for so long, finally ran out. One elf, a younger one with particularly keen eyes, looked directly at Gollum's hiding spot and saw something. A shape that didn't quite match the forest. A pale patch that caught the filtered light wrong. "There!" the elf shouted, pointing. Gollum ran. He burst from his hiding place and sprinted through the forest using all his speed and agility. Behind him, he heard the elves give chase, their footsteps light but swift. He dodged between trees, leaped over roots, squeezed through gaps in the undergrowth. But the elves were faster, more sure-footed in their home forest. They were gaining. An arrow whistled past his head so close he felt the wind of its passage. They were shooting at him now, trying to bring him down. Another arrow, this one hitting a tree inches from his shoulder. Gollum jinked left, then right, making himself a harder target. But he was tiring, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He hadn't run like this in centuries, and his body, sustained by the ring's power but not truly young, was struggling. He saw a dense thicket ahead and dove into it, thorns tearing at his skin and clothes. Perhaps he could lose them in there, could find a hole to hide in. But as he pushed through to the other side, he found himself facing more elves. They had circled around, cut off his escape. He was surrounded. "Surrender, creature," one elf commanded, an arrow trained on Gollum's chest. "We mean you no harm if you come peacefully," Gollum hissed, showing his teeth, looking for a gap in the circle. But there was none. The elves had him trapped. "What is it?" one younger elf asked, peering at Gollum with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. "Some kind of goblin?" "No," the leader said, studying Gollum more closely. "Look at the bone structure, the features beneath the corruption. This was one of the river folk. A hobbit, unless I miss my guess." "A hobbit? But they don't, they never." "This one did. The question is how and why." Rough hands seized Gollum, binding his wrists with cord that burned his skin. He thrashed and spat, trying to break free, but the elves were too strong, too practiced at this. They lifted him off his feet and carried him through the forest. They brought him to their stronghold, a place of carved wood and growing trees built into the forest itself. Gollum was thrown into a cell, a small room carved from a living tree, with a heavy door that locked from the outside. He paced the cell like a caged animal, muttering to himself, "Nasty elves, Trixie. They has no right. We wasn't hurting anyone. Just passing through we was." Days passed. The elves brought him food, which he ate mechanically, and water, which he drank. They asked him questions that he didn't answer, just hissed at them and turned away. What could he tell them? That he was searching for a magic ring? That he'd murdered his cousin centuries ago? That he'd lived under a mountain for longer than they'd been alive? They wouldn't understand. No one could understand. But then, one day the door opened and a different figure entered. Not an elf, but a man. Or something like a man. He was tall, dressed in grey robes with a long white beard and a pointed hat. His eyes were sharp and penetrating, seeming to see right through Gollum's flesh to whatever soul remained inside. "Well, well," the man said, his voice deep and resonant. "What have we here? Gandalf the Grey, at your service, though I doubt you're pleased to make my acquaintance." Gollum backed into the corner of his cell, hissing. There was something about this man, this wizard, that terrified him. Power, yes, but also a kind of knowing, as if he could read Gollum's entire sordid history just by looking at him. "The elves tell me you won't speak," Gandalf continued, settling himself on a stool near the door. "But I think you will speak to me. You see, I know what you're searching for, or rather, I know who you're searching for." Gollum's eyes widened. You knows nothing." "Ah, so you can speak. Good, good. Yes, I know quite a bit, actually. You're looking for a certain Bilbo Baggins of the Shire, a hobbit who came into possession of a ring, a very special ring. It's ours, and Baggins stole it. Nasty thief." Gandalf's eyes narrowed. "Did he now? Tell me, how did you come to possess this ring in the first place?" And somehow, despite himself, Gollum found himself talking. The words spilled out a torrent he couldn't stop. About the Gladden fields and Déagol, about the murder and the exile, about the centuries under the mountain, about Bilbo and the riddle game and the terrible loss. Gandalf listened without interrupting, his face growing graver with each revelation. When Gollum finally fell silent, exhausted by the confession, the wizard sat back and stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I see," he said quietly. "This is worse than I feared. Much worse." "What is? What's worse?" "We just want our precious back. That's all. Just give it back, and we'll go away. We'll never bother anyone again." "I'm afraid it's not that simple. That ring, your precious, is not just any magic ring. It's far more dangerous than you realize. There are forces at work, dark forces that seek it for purposes that would bring ruin to all the free peoples of Middle-earth." Gollum didn't care about free peoples or Middle-earth. He only cared about his precious. But something in Gandalf's tone made him pay attention. "What forces?" "The Dark Lord of Mordor, Sauron." He made that ring long ago, and he wants it back. If he gets it, he will have the power to conquer the world, to enslave all living things. Do you understand? Your precious is the key to everything." Gollum's mind reeled. His precious. The thing he'd loved and cherished for so long was made by some dark lord, was part of some evil plan. "No," he whispered. "No, you're lying. It's just a ring, just our precious. It makes us invisible, keeps us safe. It's good, not evil." "It's neither good nor evil in itself," Gandalf said, "but it corrupts those who possess it. Look at yourself, Gollum. Look at what it's done to you. You were once a hobbit, living a simple life. Now you're this, and it will do the same to anyone who keeps it too long." "Don't care," Gollum said stubbornly. "We wants it anyway. Needs it." Gandalf sighed. "Yes, I can see that. The ring has you in its grip as surely as Sauron himself. But I cannot let you go. You know too much. If you escaped, if the enemy captured you, you could tell them where the ring is. You could doom us all. So, you'll keep us prisoner? Forever?" "The elves have agreed to guard you. I'm sorry, Gollum. Truly sorry. But there's too much at stake." Gandalf left, and Gollum was alone again with his thoughts. The wizard's words echoed in his mind. His precious was evil, part of some dark lord's plan. It seemed impossible, but it would explain so much. The way others were searching for it, the orcs and their mysterious master, the dark power growing in the east. But even knowing this, even understanding that his precious was dangerous, Gollum couldn't stop wanting it. The need was in his bones, his blood, his very soul. He would die without it, or worse, he would live on empty and hollow, a shell of a creature with nothing to fill the void. Days became weeks, weeks became months. The elves kept him in his cell, bringing food and water, but nothing else. No one spoke to him except to give orders. He was alone, more alone even than he'd been in his mountain, because there at least he'd had his precious. He plotted escape constantly, tested the door when the guards changed, examined every inch of the walls for weakness. But the elves were too careful, too vigilant. There was no way out until one night when everything changed. He woke to the sound of fighting, screams and clash of weapons echoing through the stronghold. He pressed his face to the small window in his door and saw chaos. Orcs, dozens of them pouring through the halls. The elves were fighting back, but they were outnumbered, overwhelmed. The stronghold was under attack. Gollum's guard had left his post to join the fight, and in the confusion no one thought about the prisoner in the tree cell. Gollum worked at the door frantically, using a bit of metal he'd hidden weeks ago, a pin from his clothes that he'd sharpened against the stone floor. The lock was simple, designed to keep people in rather than keep people out. After minutes that felt like hours, he heard it click. The door swung open. Freedom! Gollum crept through the chaos, invisible in the shadows, as elves and orcs fought around him. He saw elves fall, saw orcs cut down, but he didn't care. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance. He made his way to the outer passages, following the sounds of battle in reverse, heading away from the fighting. Behind him, the stronghold burned. The orcs had set fires, and the living wood caught and blazed despite the elves' efforts to save it. Gollum emerged into the forest night and ran. He ran until the sounds of battle faded, until the glow of the fires was lost behind the trees. Only then did he stop, gasping, checking to make sure he hadn't been followed. He was free. But now what? Gandalf's words haunted him. His precious was being sought by dark powers. If he found it, if he took it back, he might lead those powers right to it. But he didn't care. He couldn't care. The need was too strong, too overwhelming. He had to have it, had to hold it again, had to feel its weight on his finger, its warmth against his skin. He reached out with his senses, trying to feel that pull, that connection to his precious. And there it was, faint but present. The ring was still out there, still calling to him. But the direction had changed. It wasn't west anymore, toward the Shire. It was east, moving east, back toward Mordor. A chill ran down Gollum's spine. His precious was being carried toward the very place Gandalf had warned him about, toward the Dark Lord, toward Sauron. No, 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 he muttered. Why is Baggins going there? Stupid, stupid hobbit. Doesn't he know? Doesn't he understand? But perhaps Baggins didn't have the ring anymore. Perhaps someone else had it now. Someone who knew what it was and was taking it to its master. The thought filled Gollum with rage and terror in equal measure. He had to get there first. Had to intercept whoever was carrying his precious before they reached Mordor. Because if Sauron got it, if the Dark Lord reclaimed his ring, then Gollum would never see it again. It would be lost to him forever. He turned east and began to run, following that faint pull. The land grew darker as he traveled, more barren. The very air tasted of ash and corruption. He was heading toward the heart of evil, toward the place where all light died. But he didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. His precious was ahead, and nothing else mattered. Not danger, not darkness, not even the threat of the Dark Lord himself. Gollum would find his precious, and this time nothing and no one would take it from him again. The hunt continued, and somewhere ahead, in the darkness of Mordor, his precious waited. The land grew darker with every mile. Where there had been forests, now there were only dead trees, their bare branches reaching toward the gray sky like skeletal fingers. Where there had been streams, now there were only dried beds, cracked and barren. The very earth seemed sick, poisoned by something Gollum could feel but not see. And always ahead, growing larger with each day, loomed the mountains of shadow. Efelduath, the ancient maps had called them, though Gollum didn't know the name. He only knew they were a wall of black stone that enclosed Mordor like a prison, or perhaps like a fortress keeping the rest of the world out. The pull of his precious led him toward those mountains, towards a gap in the stone where the land dipped down into shadow. He approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at him to turn back, to flee while he still could. But the need was stronger than fear. It always had been. At the gap in the mountains, he saw them. Guards, orcs standing watch at what must be one of the entrances to Mordor. They were alert, weapons ready, clearly expecting trouble. There was no way past them, not for someone as small and weak as Gollum. He circled north, looking for another way in. For 3 days he searched, finding nothing but sheer cliffs and impassable terrain. The mountains enclosed Mordor completely, and every entrance he found was guarded, watched, impossible to approach unseen. On the 4th day, weak with hunger and exhaustion, he made a mistake. He approached too close to one of the watch posts, trying to see if there might be a way to slip past while the guards changed. But there were more orcs than he'd realized, hidden in positions he hadn't spotted. They fell on him like wolves, dragging him down before he could run. He fought, biting and scratching, but there were too many. They bound him with heavy chains and threw him roughly to the ground. "What is it?" one orc growled, peering at Gollum with disgust. "Some kind of cave goblin." "Don't know, don't care," another replied. "Take it to the tower. Let them sort it out." The tower. Even through his terror, Gollum understood what they meant. Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, Sauron's fortress. They were going to take him there. "No, no!" he shrieked, thrashing against his bonds. "Let us go. We wasn't doing nothing, just passing through." An orc cuffed him hard across the face, splitting his lip. "Shut up, creature. Save your voice. You'll need it for the questioners." They dragged him through the gap in the mountains, and Gollum got his first true look at Mordor. It was worse than he'd imagined, worse than any nightmare. A vast plain of ash and slag broken by pools of fire and rivers of lava. The sky was black with smoke, and the air was so hot it hurt to breathe. And in the distance, rising from the plain like a spike of black iron, stood Barad-dûr. The tower was enormous, beyond anything Gollum had conceived possible. It rose thousands of feet into the smoke-filled sky, a monument to power and malice. At its top, he could see a single red eye, unblinking, watching everything. The eye of Sauron, and even from miles away, Gollum felt its gaze pass over him like a physical weight. They took him into the tower, down passages of black stone lit by no natural light. The walls seemed to absorb sound, to drink in hope and joy and warmth, leaving only cold despair. Gollum whimpered as they descended, knowing in his bones that he was going to a place from which few returned. They threw him into a cell, a small room carved from solid rock, and left him there. Hours passed, or perhaps days, he couldn't tell. There was no light except a dim red glow that came from somewhere he couldn't see, and no sound except the distant rumble of the mountain's fires. When they came for him, he was dragged to a chamber deeper in the tower. The room was circular, with instruments hanging on the walls, tools designed for only one purpose. In the center stood a tall figure, robed in black, its face hidden beneath a hood. "Ah, what have we here?" the figure asked, and its voice was like ice scraping across stone. A sneaking little spy, caught at our borders. Tell me, creature, what were you seeking? Nothing, Gollum whispered, his voice barely audible. We was looking for... Speak up, the figure gestured, and pain lanced through Gollum's body, pain like nothing he'd ever felt. It was as if his bones were being pulled apart, his flesh being peeled away. He screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the chamber. I ask again, what were you seeking? Food, Gollum gasped when the pain stopped. Just food, we was hungry. Lies. Another gesture, another wave of agony. This time it lasted longer, and Gollum felt something break inside him, some last barrier between defiance and submission. The truth now, or I will make this last for days, for weeks, for years if necessary. We have time, you and I, all the time in the world. And so, piece by piece, sob by sob, Gollum told them, not everything, not at first. But they were patient and skilled, and they knew how to hurt him in ways that left no marks but destroyed him nonetheless. They broke him down, cracked him open, and spilled out all his secrets like water from a broken vessel. He told them about his precious, about how he'd found it, how he'd kept it, how it had been stolen. He told them about Baggins, about the riddle game, about his desperate search. And when they pressed him, when they hurt him until he could barely think, he told them the one thing he'd tried so hard to keep hidden. The Shire, he sobbed. Baggins lives in the Shire, a hobbit from the Shire. That's all we knows. That's all, please, please, no more. The figure leaned closer, and even through his pain, Gollum felt its satisfaction. The Shire, and the name was Baggins, you say? Bilbo Baggins. Yes, yes, Baggins, we told you everything. Please let us go. Let you go? The figure's laugh was like breaking glass. Oh no, little spy, you're far too useful. You will stay here in the Dark Lord's hospitality until we have no more need of you. They took him back to his cell, but the torture didn't end. Day after day, or what he thought were days in the timeless dark, they came for him. Sometimes they hurt him. Sometimes they just asked questions, the same questions over and over, checking his story for inconsistencies. Sometimes they simply left him alone in the darkness, and that was almost worse than the pain. They wanted to know everything about the Shire. Where it was, how to get there, who lived there, how it was defended. They asked about Baggins, about his home, his family, his friends. They wanted to know about the ring itself, how it worked, what it could do. And Gollum, broken and defeated, told them what he could. He had no strength left to resist, no will to fight. The tower had taken everything from him, hollowed him out until he was just a shell that responded to their questions like a trained animal. But through it all, through the pain and the fear and the degradation, one thought remained. His precious was still out there. They hadn't found it yet. If he could just survive, just endure, maybe someday he would escape. Maybe someday he would hold it again. The thought kept him alive when everything else said he should die. His precious, waiting for him, calling to him across the miles. Time lost all meaning in the tower. He existed in an eternal present of suffering, each moment stretching into infinity. But slowly, very slowly, the visits from his torturers became less frequent. The questions stopped. They had gotten what they wanted from him, wrung him dry of every useful fact. Now he was just another prisoner, forgotten in the depths of Barad-dûr, left to rot in the darkness. But Gollum had learned something during his time in the tower. He had learned that even here, in the heart of evil, there were cracks in the system. The orcs who guarded him were lazy, bored with their duty. The passages that led to his cell were old, with stones that had shifted over the centuries, creating gaps and weaknesses. And he had learned to be patient, more patient even than before, because the tower had taught him that rushing led to more pain, while waiting, enduring, might lead to opportunity. That opportunity came on a day when the orcs were distracted by some upheaval in the tower above. He heard shouting, running feet, the clash of weapons, some kind of fight or riot, he couldn't tell which, but his guards left their posts, and for the first time in weeks or months he was truly alone. The chains that bound him were old, weakened by rust and time. He had been working at them secretly, abrading them against the stone of his cell wall when no one was watching. Now, with desperate strength, he pulled and twisted until one link finally snapped. He was free of the chains, but still locked in his cell. The door was thick and barred from the outside, but Gollum had noticed, during the long hours of sitting in the dark, that there was a gap where the door met the floor, a gap worn by centuries of doors opening and closing, widening the space bit by bit. It was small, terribly small, barely wide enough for a rat to squeeze through, but Gollum was thin now, thinner than he'd ever been. The tower had starved him, reduced him to skin and bones, and he could dislocate his shoulders if he had to, could contort his body in ways that would break a normal person. He worked at the gap, scraping and clawing, widening it fraction by fraction. His fingers bled, his nails broke, but he didn't stop. This was his chance. Perhaps his only chance. Finally, after what felt like hours, he managed to force his head through. Then his shoulders, dislocating both with sickening pops that made him bite back screams. Then his body, scraping against the stone, leaving skin behind. And then he was through, lying on the passage floor, gasping with pain and exhaustion and relief. He couldn't stay here. The orcs would come back, would find him missing. He had to move, had to escape while the chaos in the tower gave him cover. Gollum crept through the passages, following his instincts and his memory of being brought in. Up, always up toward the surface, toward air and freedom. Several times he had to hide as orc patrols rushed past, but they were too busy with whatever crisis was unfolding to notice one small creature in the shadows. He found a guard post, abandoned in the confusion, and beyond it, stairs leading up. He climbed them, his legs shaking with exhaustion, expecting at any moment to be spotted, to be dragged back to his cell. But luck, which had abandoned him so often, finally favored him. He reached the surface, emerging into the toxic air of Mordor, and saw that the guard post at the mountain gap was undermanned. Most of the orcs had been called away to deal with the disturbance in the tower. Gollum waited until the few remaining guards were looking the other way. Then he ran. He ran with the last of his strength, sprinting across the open ground towards the gap in the mountains. He heard shouts behind him, heard the twang of bowstrings, but the arrows fell short, and then he was through the gap, out of Mordor, stumbling down the slopes into the barren lands beyond. He ran until he could run no more, until his legs gave out and he collapsed in a dry stream bed. He lay there, gasping, waiting for pursuit. But none came. Perhaps they thought he wasn't worth chasing. Perhaps they had bigger concerns, or perhaps they simply didn't care. He was just one broken creature, no threat to the vast power of Mordor. Slowly, painfully, Gollum got to his feet. He was free. He had survived Barad-dûr, something few could claim. But he was changed. The tower had marked him, scarred him in ways that went deeper than flesh. And he knew, with terrible certainty, that he had betrayed his precious. He had told them about the Shire, about Baggins. He had given Sauron's servants the information they needed to hunt down the ring. "No," he whispered. "No, what have we done? What have we done?" Guilt and self-hatred warred with the ever-present need for his precious. He had to find it first, had to get to it before Sauron's servants did, had to protect it from the very danger he had created. He reached out with his senses, trying to feel that connection, that pull, and it was there, faint but present. His precious was still out there, still calling to him, not in the Shire anymore, not in any settled land. It was moving, being carried somewhere closer than before. He had to follow, had to intercept whoever was carrying his precious, had to save it from the fate he'd accidentally doomed it to. Gollum turned following that pull. His body was broken, his spirit shattered, but the need drove him on. Always the need, stronger than pain, stronger than fear, stronger than anything else in the world. He would find his precious, and this time nothing would stop him. Not orcs, not wizards, not even the Dark Lord himself. The hunt continued, and somewhere in the darkness his precious waited. Gollum wandered for weeks after his escape from Mordor, moving like a ghost through the barren lands. He avoided all settlements, all roads, all places where people might see him and ask questions. He was a hunted thing now, marked by both the servants of darkness and the forces of light. Neither side would welcome him, but he had his connection to his precious, and that was enough. The pull led him north and west, away from Mordor, toward lands he didn't recognize. The ring was moving, being carried by someone, and Gollum followed with single-minded determination. The landscape changed as he traveled. The ash and slag of Mordor's borders gave way to rocky hills, then to grasslands, then to something else entirely. A vast expanse of wetlands stretched before him, pools and streams and patches of solid ground woven together in a treacherous maze. The dead marshes. The name came to him from some ancient memory, some fragment of lore he'd heard centuries ago. This was a battlefield once, where great armies had clashed and thousands had died. Now it was a haunted place, where the bodies of the fallen lay preserved beneath the water, their faces still visible to those who dared to look. Gollum stood at the edge of the marshes and felt the pull of his precious. It was here, somewhere in this waterlogged wasteland. Not in the marshes themselves, but beyond them, moving along their edge. Whoever carried the ring was taking a path that skirted this desolate place. Perfect. The marshes would be his hiding place, his sanctuary. He could live here, survive here, and wait. Wait for his precious to come close enough that he could take it back. He waded into the water, feeling it close around his legs. It was cold and stagnant, smelling of decay and old death. But Gollum had lived in worse places. This was nothing compared to the dungeons of Barad-dûr. He found a relatively dry patch of ground, a small island in the midst of the pools, and made it his camp. There was food here if you knew where to look. Small fish in the streams, though they tasted foul. Frogs and newts hiding in the reeds. Once he caught a water snake, thick and muscular, and ate it raw, savoring the fresh meat. The marshes had their own rhythm, their own dark beauty. At night, strange lights flickered over the water, corpse candles the old folk called them, and beneath the surface he could see them, the dead, preserved perfectly by the strange chemistry of the marsh water. They lay as if sleeping, their eyes open, their hands reaching up toward the light they would never see again. Gollum found them fascinating and horrible in equal measure. Sometimes he would crouch at the water's edge and look down at them, studying their faces. Young men mostly, though some were elves, their beauty unmarred by death. Warriors who had fought in some long-ago war and lost. Poor things, he would whisper. Poor dead things. At least yous don't have to search any more. Don't have to want and need and hurt. Yous is at peace, yes, yes. But Gollum would never be at peace. Not until he had his precious back. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. The seasons changed overhead, summer fading to autumn, autumn to winter. Gollum barely noticed. He lived in the marshes like one of its creatures, hunting and eating and sleeping in brief snatches, always aware of that pull, that connection to his ring. And slowly, so slowly, the pull grew stronger. His precious was coming closer, moving along the edge of the marshes, heading toward Mordor. Whoever carried it was being drawn to the same place Gollum had escaped from. Foolish, he muttered to himself. Foolish to go there. They'll take it, they will. The Dark Lord will claim it, and then we'll never see it again. Never, never. But perhaps that's what the bearer wanted. Perhaps they were taking it to Mordor deliberately, to give it to Sauron. The thought filled Gollum with rage and despair. After everything, after all his suffering and searching, would his precious simply be handed over to the enemy? He had to know, had to see who carried it, and what their intentions were, and if necessary, he had to stop them. He began moving through the marshes, following the pull, getting closer to the edge where his precious traveled. He was careful, so careful, staying hidden, watching from a distance. The ring's bearer would have guards, protectors. Gollum couldn't risk being seen too soon. And then, one evening as the sun set red and angry over the western hills, he saw them. 2 figures, small and struggling, making their way through the rocky land at the marsh's edge. Hobbits. His heart leapt. Hobbits like him or like he had been. But something was wrong. They looked exhausted, afraid, constantly looking over their shoulders as if expecting pursuit. Gollum crept closer, using every skill he possessed to stay hidden. He had to see, had to know for certain. Was one of them Baggins? Had the thief finally come within his reach? But as he got closer, he realized these were not hobbits he knew. One was young, with bright eyes and a determined set to his jaw, though fear and exhaustion marked his face. The other was stouter, more practical-looking, with a gardener's hands and a loyal heart written in every gesture, and around the younger one's neck, hanging on a chain beneath his shirt. Gollum could sense it. His precious, so close now, close enough to feel its warmth, its power, its call. "Ah, mine," he whispered, so softly even he could barely hear it. "Mine, mine, mine." He followed them for days, staying just out of sight, learning their patterns. The young one was Frodo. He heard the other call him. The stout one was Sam. They were heading to Mordor, that much was clear, and they were terrified of what lay ahead. But why? Why would hobbits, peaceful folk who loved their gardens and their comfort, be traveling to the dark land? What possible reason could they have? Unless they were trying to destroy it, trying to take his precious to the one place where it could be unmade. The realization hit Gollum like a physical blow. They weren't trying to give the ring to Sauron. They were trying to destroy it, to throw it into the fires of Mount Doom and end its existence forever. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no, they can't. They mustn't. Precious must not be destroyed. Must not." But even as horror filled him, a cold, calculating part of his mind began to work. If they were trying to destroy the ring, they would have to get past Mordor's defenses. They would need a guide, someone who knew the way, who could lead them through the treacherous paths. Someone like Gollum. He could help them, pretend to be their ally, could lead them through the marshes, show them the secret ways. And when the time was right, when they trusted him, he could take his precious back, could steal it and flee before they knew what had happened. Yes, that was the plan. He would make himself useful, indispensable even, and then he would betray them, just as Baggins had betrayed him all those years ago. But first, he had to make contact, had to let them catch him, but in a way that didn't seem threatening. He needed them to think they had captured him, that they had the upper hand. Gollum waited for the right moment. The hobbits were struggling through a particularly treacherous part of the marsh, Frodo in the lead, Sam following close behind. They were tired, their attention divided between the path and their fear of pursuit. Gollum crept up behind them, making just enough noise to alert Sam. The stout hobbit spun around. his hand going to his sword. "There's something following us, Mr. Frodo. I can hear it." Gollum let himself be seen just for a moment, a pale shape in the darkness. Then he dove into the water and swam away, but not too far. He wanted them to give chase, to think they could catch him, and they did. Sam splashed after him, cursing and calling out. Frodo followed more cautiously, his hand on something at his breast. The ring, Gollum knew, his precious. They cornered him on a small island, Sam with his sword drawn, Frodo holding a length of rope, the elven rope that burned when it touched Gollum's skin, though he tried not to show how much it hurt. "Got you now, you sneaking villain," Sam said triumphantly. "Been following us for days, haven't you? What do you want?" Gollum cowered, making himself look harmless, pitiful. "Ha! Nothing. We wasn't following, just coincidence. Yes, please don't hurt poor Sméagol." "Sméagol?" Frodo's eyes widened. He leaned closer, studying Gollum's face in the dim light. "You're Sméagol? The one Gandalf told us about." Ah, so the wizard had spoken of him. That complicated things, but perhaps it could work in his favor. If they thought they knew his story, they might feel pity instead of fear. Yes, Sméagol, that's our name. Lost we is, lost and hungry and alone. Please, kind masters, please don't hurt us." Sam kept his sword steady. "Master Frodo, we should tie him up proper and leave him here. He's naught but trouble, I can feel it." But Frodo was looking at Gollum with something that might have been compassion. "He knows these marshes. Look how he moves through them like he's lived here. We've been struggling for days, Sam. We're lost, and we need help. Help from him. Mr. Frodo, you can't be serious. Gandalf said Gollum might have a role to play in all this. Maybe this is it. Maybe he's meant to guide us. Guide them. Yes, perfect." Gollum looked up at Frodo with wide, hopeful eyes. "Guide? Sméagol can guide. Knows the ways, yes, secret paths through the marshes, paths the enemies doesn't watch. Sméagol can help nice masters if they promises not to hurt us." Frodo made his decision. "All right. You'll guide us through the marshes and to the mountains beyond. But Sam will keep hold of this rope. And if you try anything at all, we'll leave you tied to a rock. Do you understand?" Yes, Sméagol understands. We'll be good, we'll help. Swears on the precious, swears." At the word precious, both hobbits stiffened. They knew what the ring meant to him, and in that moment, a strange thing happened. As Gollum looked at Frodo, at the exhaustion and fear and determination in the young hobbit's face, something stirred in him, something long buried, almost forgotten. This hobbit was going to Mordor to destroy the ring, to end its evil once and for all, and in doing so, he would save countless lives, prevent untold suffering. It was a noble quest, a heroic sacrifice, the kind of quest Sméagol might have understood once, long ago, before everything went wrong. "Come on, then," Sam said gruffly, keeping the rope tight. "Lead on, Slinker, and remember, I'll be watching." Gollum turned and began to lead them through the marshes, showing them the safe paths, warning them away from the dangerous pools. And as he walked, he felt something he hadn't felt in centuries. Purpose. He was helping them, actually helping them, not just pretending while he plotted betrayal. Part of him, the part that was still Sméagol, wanted them to succeed. Wanted the ring destroyed so its curse would finally end. But another part, the part that was Gollum, whispered constantly, "Mine, my precious, must take it back, must have it." Two voices in his head, two desires pulling him in opposite directions. Help them or betray them, Sméagol or Gollum, redemption or damnation. He didn't know which would win. Perhaps he wouldn't know until the moment came, until he had to make a choice that would define everything. But for now, in the darkness of the dead marshes, with two brave hobbits following behind him, Gollum led the way, one step at a time, toward Mordor, toward Mount Doom, toward whatever ending awaited them all. The sun rose over the marshes, painting the water red and gold. The dead beneath the surface seemed to watch them pass, their eyes following the small group as they made their slow progress toward the mountains of shadow. And somewhere deep in Gollum's heart, in a place he'd thought long dead, something like hope flickered just for a moment, just enough to make him wonder if perhaps, things could still end differently than he'd imagined. His precious was close, closer than it had been in decades, and ahead lay choices he couldn't yet foresee, paths that would lead to glory or ruin, salvation or destruction. But that was tomorrow's concern. Today, he had a job to do. Today, he was a guide, leading two brave hobbits through the marshes toward their destiny and his own. "This way, masters," he called softly. "This way to the Black Gate, but sneaky, yes, must be sneaky. Enemies is watching, always watching." And on they went, three small figures in a vast and terrible land, carrying between them a burden that would change the world. The story was not over. In many ways, it was only just beginning. But that, as they say, is a tale for another time.